In shallow coastal waters where sunlight penetrates easily and seagrass meadows ripple like submerged fields, the green sea turtle moves with an unhurried confidence that encourages dangerous assumptions. Its broad shell glides above the bottom, flippers sweeping slowly through the water, head lowered as if grazing with deliberate calm, and to human eyes this posture reads as peace, patience, even gentleness. Tourists drift above them with cameras and snorkels, interpreting the turtle's steady pace as indifference and mistaking tolerance for trust. Yet this animal is not a floating lawn ornament, but a heavily armored, muscular reptile built to survive collisions, competition, and the mechanical demands of feeding on some of the toughest plant material in the sea. The green sea turtle did not evolve to accommodate human curiosity, and the traits that allow it to thrive as one of the ocean's dominant herbivores are the same traits that make close encounters unpredictable and occasionally dangerous. The illusion of harmlessness begins with diet, because green sea turtles are often described as vegetarians, a word that carries cultural baggage implying passivity and peace, yet in ecological terms, their feeding strategy is anything but gentle. Seagrass is not soft underwater grass, but a fibrous, silica-rich plant, reinforced to withstand constant grazing, wave action, and sediment abrasion. And tearing it free requires strength, leverage, and cutting surfaces capable of resisting wear. The turtle's beak, often overlooked beneath the smooth curve of its face, is a sharp-edged, keratinous structure anchored to a skull designed to absorb repeated stress, allowing the animal to shear tough blades cleanly and efficiently. When the turtle bites, it does not nibble or pull tentatively, but clamps down and twists, using neck muscles and body mass to rip vegetation from the substrate, a motion that translates poorly when applied to anything other than plants. This beak is not a delicate tool, and its power becomes obvious when green sea turtles broaden their diet, as juveniles and even adults will consume jellyfish, sponges, and invertebrates when available, prey that require crushing and tearing rather than simple clipping. Jellyfish, despite their soft appearance, resist capture through elasticity and stinging defenses, and turtles counter this with firm bites that immobilize and shred the prey before swallowing. This capacity for force explains why human skin, wetsuit material, and even fins offer little resistance when a turtle bites defensively or in response to provocation, producing injuries that range from deep bruising to lacerations that require medical attention. Incidents involving turtle bites often follow a predictable pattern rooted in human behavior rather than animal aggression, as snorkelers and divers attempt to hand-feed turtles or position themselves directly in front of moving animals to secure photographs. Feeding conditions turtles to associate humans with food, altering their natural caution and increasing the likelihood of assertive behavior when expectations are not met. A turtle that has learned to take food from a hand does not differentiate easily between offered vegetation and fingers, especially when water movement distorts perception and reaction time is limited. When the turtle lunges forward to grab what it perceives as food and clamps down, the bite is fast, forceful, and not immediately released, because the beak is designed to maintain grip until the tearing motion is complete. Blocking a turtle's path produces a different but equally instructive response, as green sea turtles are animals of momentum rather than agility, built to cover long distances efficiently rather than execute sudden evasive maneuvers. Their bodies are heavy, often weighing hundreds of pounds, and their flippers generate powerful thrust optimized for cruising speed, not rapid braking. When a turtle swims toward a feeding area, nesting beach, or breathing spot at the surface, it commits to that trajectory, and obstacles that appear unexpectedly are not always avoided gracefully. A diver hovering directly in front of a turtle may be rammed not out of aggression, but because the animal cannot slow or turn quickly enough to prevent collision, resulting in impacts that feel deliberate to the human involved, but are simply the consequence of physics and anatomy. These collisions are intensified by the turtle's shell, a rigid structure formed from fused ribs and vertebrae covered by thick scutes, capable of withstanding predator attacks and environmental hazards, but unforgiving when it meets a human body. A turtle rising to the surface for air may strike a surfer from below, lifting board and rider unexpectedly, while a turtle cruising just beneath the surface can collide with swimmers who underestimate its speed. In such moments, the turtle does not flinch or recoil as a mammal might, but continues forward, its mass carrying it through the encounter with little change in course, leaving humans startled, bruised, or worse. Understanding why turtles behave this way requires stepping back into their evolutionary context, because green sea turtles evolved in a world where hesitation invited predation and decisiveness increased survival. As juveniles, they face intense pressure from fish, birds, and sharks, and those that survive do so by moving with purpose and reacting forcefully when threatened. As adults, their size and shell provide protection, but their habits still reflect a lineage shaped by danger, not diplomacy. When approached too closely, a turtle may bite or shove not out of malice, but as a reflexive response to encroachment, a way to reassert space and resume its path without prolonged interaction. Their sensory world also contributes to misunderstanding, as turtles rely heavily on vision, adapted for underwater clarity and contrast, rather than fine detail at close range. Objects presented near their faces may not be interpreted accurately, especially in turbid water or shifting light, and a hand extended toward a turtle can appear indistinguishable from food or debris. Combined with conditioning from human feeding, this sensory limitation creates situations where bites occur suddenly, without warning displays that humans expect from animals capable of aggression. The green sea turtle's role as a grazer extends far beyond individual feeding events, shaping entire seagrass ecosystems through patterns of consumption that promote productivity and resilience. By cropping seagrass rather than uprooting it, turtles stimulate new growth, preventing older blades from accumulating epiphytes that reduce photosynthesis. This grazing maintains meadow health, increases nutrient cycling, and supports diverse communities of fish and invertebrates that rely on seagrass for shelter and food. In this way, the turtle functions as an ecosystem engineer, its feeding habits determining whether coastal habitats flourish or decline, a responsibility that demands constant movement and sustained effort. This ecological importance reinforces why turtles cannot afford to be delayed or diverted easily, as disruptions to feeding routines ripple outward, affecting energy balance, reproductive success, and habitat condition. Nesting females in particular operate under tight energetic budgets, accumulating reserves over months of feeding before undertaking long migrations to natal beaches where they lay eggs and return to sea. During these periods, unnecessary interactions with humans increase stress and energy expenditure, potentially compromising reproductive output and survival. Despite their apparent calm, green sea turtles are capable of surprising bursts of speed when necessary, especially when startled or threatened, accelerating rapidly with powerful strokes that propel them away from danger. These sudden movements can catch divers off guard, as a turtle that appeared placid moments before becomes a fast-moving mass of muscle and shell, closing distance or retreating with equal force. In crowded tourist sites, such reactions increase the risk of accidental contact, particularly when multiple people surround a turtle, restricting its options and elevating stress. The irony is that many of these encounters occur precisely because turtles tolerate human presence better than other marine animals, lingering in shallow waters and allowing close approaches that would send fish or sharks fleeing. This tolerance is not an invitation, but a byproduct of their life history, as adult turtles have few natural predators and rely on armor rather than flight for protection. When humans interpret this lack of avoidance as friendliness, they project intentions that the turtle does not share, setting the stage for conflict. Education efforts often focus on protecting turtles from harm, emphasizing the threats posed by pollution, fishing gear, and habitat loss. Yet there is equal value in protecting humans from misunderstanding turtles, because negative encounters can lead to fear, retaliation, or pressure to restrict turtle presence in popular areas. Respecting turtles as powerful, space-dependent animals reduces risk on both sides, allowing coexistence that preserves the ecological role of these grazers without unnecessary injury. Seen clearly, the green sea turtle is neither monster nor mascot, but a large, ancient reptile navigating a modern seascape crowded with people who move differently, think differently, and expect accommodation where none evolved. Its beak is sharp because it must be, its body heavy because it carries armor, and its movements direct because efficiency keeps it alive. When it bites or collides, it is not breaking character, but expressing it, acting according to rules written long before wetsuits and cameras entered the water. In the seagrass meadow, where sunlight dances across blades and sediment clouds rise with each bite, the turtle continues its work uninterrupted, cropping, moving, surfacing, and diving again, indifferent to the narratives humans attach to its presence. Gentle grazing and bone-crushing power coexist in the same animal, not as a contradiction, but as a necessity, reminding anyone who drifts too close that even the calmest figures in the ocean carry the weight of survival in every movement. In warm, tropical seas, where currents bend around islands and underwater ridges, manta rays arrive like living aircraft, their silhouettes widening as they approach, until the water itself seems to part for them. From above, they appear serene and unhurried. Enormous diamond shapes gliding just beneath the surface, mouths open as they filter invisible clouds of plankton from the water. This image has become one of the most powerful icons of marine tourism, a promise of peaceful communion with a gentle giant. And it draws crowds in numbers that would have been unimaginable only decades ago. Boats anchor shoulder to shoulder, snorkelers spill into the water in bright vests, and divers line up along the reef like spectators at an arena, all waiting for the moment when a manta passes close enough to feel its presence. What is rarely acknowledged in this scene is that size itself is a force, and that even an animal with no intention of harm can become dangerous when confined, harassed, and surrounded by bodies that do not understand how it moves. Manta rays are filter feeders, specialists in consuming some of the smallest forms of life in the ocean, yet they are also among the largest fishes on Earth, with wingspans that can exceed the length of a small boat and bodies dense with muscle designed to move enormous volumes of water efficiently. Their mouths, positioned at the front of the head rather than underneath like many rays, gape open as they swim, funneling plankton-rich water across specialized gill plates that trap food while expelling seawater. This feeding strategy requires steady, uninterrupted motion, often along predictable paths shaped by currents, tides, and underwater topography. When mantas feed or visit cleaning stations, they are not wandering aimlessly, but following routes refined over years, sometimes decades, as individuals return repeatedly to the same locations where food concentrates or cleaner fish remove parasites from their skin. Cleaning stations are particularly important sites in a manta's daily routine, as these areas host small reef fishes that pick away dead tissue, algae, and parasites, maintaining the manta's skin health and reducing drag during swimming. For a large, slow reproducing animal, this maintenance is not optional but essential, because skin damage increases infection risk and reduces hydrodynamic efficiency, raising the energetic cost of movement. At these stations, mantas often circle patiently, lining up to receive service, rolling slightly to expose different surfaces to their cleaners, and repeating the pattern until their needs are met. It is a vulnerable moment, one that requires trust in the environment and freedom of movement, yet it is precisely these predictable behaviors that draw human crowds into the water. As tourism has grown, cleaning stations that once hosted a handful of mantas and a few respectful observers have become congested arenas filled with bubbles, fins, camera flashes, and outstretched hands. Snorkelers kick frantically to hold position, often drifting directly into the paths mantas use to approach or depart, while divers cluster too close to the reef, creating walls of bodies that restrict movement. In this chaos, mantas are forced to alter their trajectories, banking sharply or accelerating to avoid collision, maneuvers that demand far more energy than their usual slow, sweeping turns. When avoidance is not possible, contact occurs, and the results can be frightening for both animal and human. A manta ray weighs as much as a small car, and although its movements appear graceful, the water displaced by its wings carries immense force. When a manta banks suddenly or beats its pectoral fins to gain speed, it creates powerful currents capable of knocking swimmers off balance, pulling masks free, or driving bodies into one another. Tail whips, often misinterpreted as aggression, are usually reflexive actions triggered when something brushes against the sensitive trailing edge of the animal or blocks its escape route. The tail, long and muscular even without a venomous spine, can strike with enough force to bruise or disorient a human, especially when delivered unexpectedly in open water. Collisions, too, are rarely acts of hostility, but consequences of momentum and limited maneuverability in crowded conditions. A manta approaching a cleaning station commits its mass to a glide path, and unlike a small fish, it cannot stop instantly or pivot on the spot. When a snorkeler drifts into that path at the wrong moment, the manta may collide shoulder first, pushing the person aside with the leading edge of its wing, an impact that can feel overwhelming and induce panic. Panic spreads quickly in water, as flailing limbs and rapid breathing increase chaos, further elevating the risk of injury for everyone involved. Understanding why these encounters are becoming more frequent requires examining not just human behavior, but the biology and stress responses of mantas themselves. Manta rays possess large brains relative to body size and exhibit complex behaviors, including individual recognition, long-term sight fidelity, and learning based on experience. When repeatedly harassed at a particular location, mantas do not simply endure, they adjust. Some individuals shorten their visits, abandoning cleaning sessions before they are complete, while others avoid the site altogether, shifting their routines to less disturbed areas, even if those areas offer inferior feeding or cleaning opportunities. Over time, these changes alter population-level patterns, reducing manta sightings at famous locations and undermining the very tourism that drew people there in the first place. Stress in manta rays manifests physiologically as well as behaviorally, although measuring it directly in the wild is challenging. Elevated stress increases metabolic demands, suppresses immune function, and may affect reproductive success in animals that already reproduce slowly, with long gestation periods and single offspring. A female manta that abandons a productive feeding or cleaning area due to constant disturbance may struggle to meet the energetic demands of pregnancy, while juveniles exposed to chronic stress may experience reduced growth or altered movement patterns that increase predation risk. The irony of the situation lies in the mismatch between intent and outcome, as most people entering the water with mantas believe they are participating in a benign or even conservation-minded activity. They are drawn by the idea of proximity to a peaceful giant, yet their collective presence transforms that peace into pressure. Each individual snorkeler may feel harmless, but together they create an obstacle course that mantas must navigate repeatedly, turning a critical habitat into a gauntlet of moving barriers. This pressure is compounded by the sensory world of mantas, which differs profoundly from that of humans. Mantas rely on vision, adapted for wide fields of view and contrast detection rather than fine detail, and in plankton, rich water visibility can be limited. A cluster of brightly colored snorkelers may appear as a shifting mass rather than distinct individuals, making precise avoidance difficult. Additionally, mantas possess sensitive electroreceptors that detect the weak electric fields generated by living organisms, a sense used to locate prey and navigate close to the seafloor. In crowded waters, this sensory input becomes cluttered, potentially adding to confusion and stress. When mantas are startled or repeatedly blocked, their responses can escalate from gentle avoidance to abrupt flight, accelerating rapidly and abandoning the area entirely. These departures often coincide with spikes in tourist activity, leaving guides and operators puzzled as sightings decline despite unchanged environmental conditions. In some regions, authorities have been forced to close or restrict access to once famous manta aggregation sites, implementing limits on swimmer numbers, enforcing minimum distances, or banning in-water interactions altogether to give the animals space to resume normal behavior. Such closures highlight a central truth about large marine animals, which is that tolerance should never be mistaken for consent. Mantas do not attack people because they have no evolutionary reason to do so, but they also do not benefit from being crowded, touched, or obstructed, and their size ensures that any mistake carries disproportionate consequences. A manta does not need teeth or venom to injure a human. Mass, speed, and water displacement are sufficient when conditions deteriorate. From an ecological perspective, mantas occupy a crucial role in pelagic systems, transferring energy from plankton to higher trophic levels and serving as indicators of ocean productivity. Their movements link surface waters to reefs and seamounts, and their presence reflects the health of current-driven ecosystems that support countless other species. When mantas alter their behavior due to human disturbance, it signals not just a tourism problem, but a disruption of natural patterns that ripple outward through the marine environment. Respectful observation allows a different story to unfold, one in which mantas move freely, approach cleaning stations unimpeded, and sometimes choose to pass close to humans on their own terms. In these moments, the encounter feels genuinely extraordinary, not because of proximity forced by crowding, but because of voluntary overlap between species operating under different rules. Such experiences are quieter, less chaotic, and far more sustainable. Yet they require restraint in a culture that often equates closeness with value. The giant everyone crowds is not fragile in the sense of physical weakness, but it is vulnerable to cumulative pressure, to repeated small intrusions that add up to meaningful change. Each kick, each grab, each blocked path is insignificant alone, yet together they reshape behavior, close habitats, and transform wonder into stress. In the open ocean, where mantas evolved to glide through vast spaces with few obstacles, crowding is an artificial challenge imposed by a species that rarely considers how its numbers amplify impact. Seen clearly, the manta ray remains what it has always been, a filter feeder built for movement, patience, and scale, navigating a world defined by currents and microscopic prey rather than human fascination. The risk in manta encounters does not arise from malice, but from mismatch between an animal that requires space and a crowd that refuses to give it. When that space is restored, mantas return to their circuits, cleaning stations reopen, and the ecosystem resumes its quiet choreography, a reminder that awe is best preserved at a distance, respectful enough to let giants remain calm. Tourism posters and aquarium billboards have spent decades polishing the dolphin into a symbol of harmless joy, presenting a smooth grey face locked into what looks like a permanent grin, a curved mouth that suggests kindness, intelligence, and an almost human warmth that invites trust without hesitation. Yet the moment the camera pulls back from the choreography of shows and shallow lagoons, a very different animal fills the frame, one shaped not by friendship but by pressure, competition, and an evolutionary arms race that rewards speed, violence, and precision. Dolphins are not gentle swimmers that accidentally evolve teeth. They are apex predators whose bodies are engineered for pursuit, capture, and domination within a three-dimensional environment where escape routes are limited and mistakes are punished immediately. Their streamlined form hides a dense skeleton and thick muscle mass designed to generate explosive acceleration. Their jaws house rows of conical teeth meant not for chewing, but for gripping slippery prey and preventing escape. And their neck vertebrae are fused to stabilize the skull during high-speed impacts. A structural choice that sacrifices flexibility in exchange for power and control during ramming, twisting, and tearing motions that define their hunting style. In the open ocean and along complex coastlines, dolphins occupy a role that sits uncomfortably close to that of sharks, not because they share ancestry or hunting methods, but because they fill the same ecological niche of mobile, intelligent predators that operate near the top of the food web, shaping the behavior and distribution of everything beneath them. They hunt cooperatively when it offers an advantage, herding fish into tight balls or driving them against shorelines, reefs, or mudbanks where escape becomes impossible. Yet they are equally capable of solo kills that rely on speed and surprise rather than teamwork. When a dolphin closes in on prey, the encounter is rarely gentle or clean, as fish are stunned by repeated tail slaps, crushed against hard surfaces, or bitten and shaken until spinal columns snap. Behaviors that reflect an animal evolve to end resistance quickly, rather than engage in prolonged struggle that wastes energy and increases risk. This same physical toolkit, when redirected toward humans who drift into their space under false assumptions, becomes deeply dangerous in ways that tourism culture rarely acknowledges. Documented incidents involving dolphins and humans reveal a pattern that contradicts the friendly myth without resorting to exaggeration or sensationalism, as these animals have repeatedly demonstrated that they are capable of deliberate aggression when boundaries are crossed or expectations are violated. Swimmers have been rammed with enough force to fracture ribs and dislocate joints, an outcome that makes sense when one considers that a dolphin can reach speeds exceeding that of a sprinting human many times over and carries its mass like a living torpedo. Hands and feet have been bitten during close interactions, not as exploratory nibbles but as targeted grabs that leave deep puncture wounds shaped by teeth designed to penetrate scales and muscle, injuries that require medical intervention and sometimes surgery. In controlled environments, such as swim with programs and captive facilities, dolphins have been observed pinning people underwater, dragging them by limbs, or forcibly pushing them toward pool walls, behaviors that align disturbingly well with dominance displays used against rivals or resistant prey in the wild. Male dolphins, in particular, exhibit a pattern of aggression that is inseparable from their natural reproductive strategies, as alliances of males in many species form long-term coalitions that actively harass, isolate, and control females during mating periods, using force and coordination to prevent escape and reduce competition from other males. This behavior, often euphemistically described in softer language by tourist operators, translates poorly when humans enter the equation, especially when swimmers misinterpret close contact as affection rather than control. There are documented cases of male dolphins persistently circling, nudging, and attempting to restrain swimmers, behaviors that mirror coercive tactics used within dolphin societies, and that escalate when resistance is met, revealing that the animal is not confused or playful, but operating within a behavioral framework that prioritizes dominance and access rather than mutual consent or safety. The danger is not rooted in malice, but in misalignment, a collision between an animal that evolved under relentless selective pressure and a human culture that insists on projecting innocence onto any species that appears intelligent or expressive. Dolphins are highly intelligent, yet intelligence does not equate to gentleness, and in many ecological contexts, it amplifies the capacity for complex and sometimes brutal behavior. Their large brains support advanced social learning, long-term memory, and sophisticated communication systems, all of which allow them to adapt quickly to new situations, including the artificial environments created by tourism. When humans feed dolphins, whether intentionally through sanctioned programs or accidentally by dropping fish and scraps into the water, they initiate a feedback loop that rewires the animal's perception of people, transforming humans from irrelevant background noise into competitors and resource holders. Feeding disrupts the natural cost-benefit calculations that govern dolphin behavior, as wild dolphins expend significant energy locating, chasing, and capturing prey, a process that shapes their daily movement patterns, social interactions, and risk tolerance. When food becomes predictable and tied to human presence, dolphins learn rapidly that approaching boats, swimmers, and shorelines yields rewards with minimal effort. But this shortcut comes with frustration when expectations are not met. Dolphins that have been conditioned to associate humans with food often escalate their behavior when handouts stop, using physical force, blocking movements, or aggressive posturing to pressure compliance, actions that mirror tactics used against other dolphins during competition over limited resources. Swim with programs amplify this problem by creating artificial proximity that strips away natural buffers, placing humans directly within the personal space of an animal that has no evolutionary reason to treat a large, slow-moving primate as a fragile guest. In the wild, dolphins rarely tolerate prolonged physical contact unless it serves a clear social or reproductive function. And when they do initiate contact, it is often assertive rather than gentle. By encouraging tourists to float passively while dolphins approach, operators invert the natural order of interaction, teaching dolphins that humans will not flee, resist effectively, or enforce boundaries, a lesson that can lead to increasingly rough encounters as dolphins test limits and apply escalating pressure when curiosity or expectation is not satisfied. The physiology of dolphins further explains why these encounters can turn dangerous quickly, as their bodies are built to deliver force efficiently in water, a medium where humans are inherently disadvantaged. Dolphins possess powerful axial muscles that drive their tails, generating thrust that allows rapid changes in direction and speed, while their pectoral fins function as precise control surfaces rather than primary propulsion, enabling tight turns and sudden lunges. Their skin and underlying connective tissue are adapted to withstand repeated impacts and friction, protecting them during aggressive interactions with prey or rivals, whereas human skin and bones lack any comparable protection, making even moderate contact potentially injurious. Sensory adaptations add another layer of risk, as dolphins rely heavily on echolocation to interpret their environment, emitting focused clicks that bounce off objects and return detailed information about shape, density, and movement. In murky or crowded waters, a dolphin may detect a human not as a person, but as a large, unfamiliar object occupying space within a hunting or travel corridor. And close inspection through physical contact becomes a way to resolve uncertainty. This investigative behavior, when combined with the dolphin's strength and speed, can result in collisions or bites that are not exploratory in the gentle sense humans imagine, but rather decisive tests of resistance and control. Ironically, the very traits that make dolphins so captivating to human audiences, their intelligence, social complexity, and adaptability, also make them especially dangerous when misunderstood, because they learn quickly from outcomes rather than intentions. A dolphin that successfully pushes a swimmer aside to reach a dropped fish learns that force works, just as one that bites a hand holding food learns that teeth secure resources faster than patience. Over time, these learned behaviors spread through social groups, as dolphins observe and imitate one another, creating localized populations where aggression toward humans becomes normalized, rather than exceptional. Ecologically, this shift carries consequences beyond individual injuries, as altered dolphin behavior can disrupt local food webs and increase conflict with fisheries, leading to retaliatory actions by humans who suddenly find themselves competing with bold, human, habituated predators. Dolphins that lose their natural wariness are more likely to approach boats and nets, increasing the risk of entanglement, propeller strikes, and lethal responses from frustrated fishers, outcomes that undermine conservation goals even as tourism markets itself as a tool for protection and awareness. The myth of the smiling dolphin persists because it is profitable and comforting, not because it reflects biological reality, and dismantling it requires acknowledging that apex predators do not cease to be predators simply because they are intelligent or visually appealing. Dolphins evolved in an environment where hesitation meant starvation and weakness invited attack, and their social systems reward assertiveness, coalition building, and the ability to impose will on others, traits that translate poorly into interactions with a species that insists on interpreting every approach as an invitation to bond. When dolphins snap, ram, or bite, they are not betraying some innate promise of friendliness, but behaving exactly as their evolutionary history prepared them to behave, responding to a situation where boundaries are unclear and expectations have been distorted by human intervention. Understanding dolphins as predators rather than mascots does not diminish their fascination or importance, but it does demand respect rooted in realism rather than fantasy, a recognition that coexistence depends on distance, restraint, and an honest appraisal of what these animals are capable of when placed in unnatural contexts. The ocean is not a theme park stage, and dolphins are not performers who forget their instincts once applause fades, but highly capable hunters whose presence commands caution, humility, and a willingness to abandon comforting stories in favor of uncomfortable truth. From above, a sea otter drifting on its back looks like a misplaced toy, a rounded shape wrapped in floating kelp, forepaws folded against its chest, eyes half closed, as if the ocean itself has paused to admire something soft and harmless. Yet this surface image dissolves the moment the camera sinks closer, and the water reveals what that floating calm actually supports. Sea otters are not passive ornaments of the kelp forest, but dense, muscular predators whose survival depends on relentless consumption, mechanical force, and a tolerance for violence that sits in sharp contrast to the way they are marketed to the human imagination. Their bodies are compact and heavy for their size, built not for speed in open water, but for leverage, grip, and control in cold, turbulent shallows, where prey hides inside armor, crevices, and stone. Every element of their anatomy, from their jaws to their paws to the thickness of their fur, reflects a life spent cracking, prying, and overpowering organisms that evolve shells precisely to avoid being eaten. The kelp forest itself sets the stage for this contradiction, rising from the sea floor in long, elastic columns that sway with surge and current, forming a vertical world where light filters down in shifting patterns, and every surface is occupied by something trying to eat or avoid being eaten. Sea urchins cling to rocks and kelp holdfasts with hundreds of tube feet, grazing methodically on living tissue, while crabs wedge themselves into cracks. Snails seal themselves behind spiral fortresses, and clams bury deep beneath sand and gravel. This environment rewards predators that can apply force with precision rather than speed, and the sea otter fits this niche with unsettling efficiency. Unlike seals or sea lions, which rely on teeth and momentum to catch fish, otters specialize in prey that cannot flee but can resist, and resistance is met not with patience, but with impact. A sea otter's jaw structure reveals this specialization immediately when observed closely. As the skull is broad and reinforced, the jaw muscles thick and anchored to enlarged attachment sites that allow the animal to generate immense bite force relative to its size. Their teeth are not the narrow slicing blades of a fish eater, but blunt, rounded tools designed to crush rather than cut, turning shells into fragments with repeated pressure rather than a single strike. When an otter surfaces with a crab or snail clutched to its chest, the violence of the act is easy to miss because it unfolds quietly without thrashing or blood clouds, yet the mechanics are brutal. The prey is positioned carefully, braced against the otter's body or a chosen rock, and then broken open with a series of deliberate compressions that transmit force through calcium carbonate defenses that evolved over millions of years to stop exactly this outcome. Tool use elevates this process further, as sea otters are among the few non-human mammals that regularly employ external objects to solve feeding problems, selecting stones from the seafloor and storing them in loose skin folds beneath their forelimbs for repeated use. This behavior is not a novelty or a sign of playfulness, but a direct response to the energy demands imposed by their biology, because sea otters lack the thick blubber layer that insulates most marine mammals, and must instead rely on fur so dense that it traps air against the skin. Maintaining body temperature in cold water requires constant feeding, and an adult otter may consume a quarter of its body weight each day simply to offset heat loss, a metabolic furnace that leaves little room for inefficiency or mercy. This constant hunger drives a feeding intensity that reshapes entire ecosystems, most famously through the otter's relationship with sea urchins, animals that sit at a pivotal junction in kelp forest dynamics. Urchins are capable of mowing down kelp forests when left unchecked, stripping holdfasts and turning vibrant underwater forests into barren seascapes known as urchin barrens, where little else can survive. Sea otters act as a controlling force in this system, targeting urchins relentlessly and preferentially, selecting the largest, most nutrient-rich individuals, a pressure that keeps urchin populations sparse and forces survivors into crevices and refuges where grazing is limited. Where otters are present, kelp forests rise tall and dense, supporting fish, invertebrates, and coastal productivity, while where otters are absent, the forest collapses under the quiet teeth of unchecked grazers. This role has earned sea otters a reputation as guardians of the kelp, yet the mechanism by which they perform this ecological service is not gentle stewardship, but constant predation, enforced by crushing jaws and stone hammers. The forest lives because something else dies repeatedly, and the otter is the agent of that decision. Its cuteness a visual distraction from the fact that it dictates the fate of entire habitats through appetite alone. This power is magnified by the otter's tendency to focus feeding efforts in specific areas, creating localized zones of intense predation that ripple outward through the ecosystem, altering species composition, nutrient cycling, and even carbon storage as kelp forests expand or contract. Interactions with humans reveal another side of this predator that rarely fits the postcard image, especially as coastal recreation increases and kayakers, surfers, and swimmers push deeper into otter habitat under the assumption that a small, furry marine mammal poses no threat. Sea otters are territorial in ways that are subtle but consequential, particularly females with pups and males defending feeding grounds, and when they perceive crowding or repeated intrusion, their response can escalate quickly from avoidance to confrontation. There are documented cases of otters lunging at kayaks, climbing onto boards, biting paddles, and in some instances biting people, actions that reflect a willingness to defend space and resources with physical force rather than bluff. These encounters are often framed as anomalies, yet they make sense within the context of otter behavior, because an animal that regularly confronts spiny urchins, armored crabs, and hard-shelled mollusks has little reason to fear soft, slow-moving intruders, once it has learned that humans do not retaliate effectively. An otter's bite, while not large compared to that of a seal, is capable of deep puncture wounds and crushing injuries due to the same jaw adaptations used to break shells, and a surprised or cornered individual can inflict serious harm in seconds. The danger is amplified in water, where humans are unstable and vulnerable, and where an otter's agility and grip give it complete control of the interaction. Underlying all of this is a biological compromise that defines the sea otter's existence, as their lack of blubber forces them into a perpetual balance between heat loss and energy intake, a balance that tolerates no prolonged fasting or wasted effort. Their fur, among the densest in the animal kingdom, requires constant grooming to maintain its insulating properties, and otters spend significant portions of their day cleaning and aligning hairs to preserve the air layer that keeps cold water from reaching their skin. This grooming behavior, often interpreted as leisure or play, is in fact maintenance work essential to survival, and failure to perform it leads quickly to hypothermia and death. This vulnerability explains much of the otter's intensity, because an animal that cannot afford to miss meals cannot afford to tolerate competitors or disturbances that interfere with feeding. Every crab crushed and every urchin broken represents not indulgence but necessity, a transaction in an unforgiving thermal economy that leaves little margin for error. When humans disrupt feeding sites or introduce noise and movement that scatter prey, they are not simply interrupting a tranquil scene, but interfering with an animal's ability to meet daily energy demands, a pressure that can push behavior toward aggression. Seen in this light, the sea otter becomes less a mascot and more a keystone predator, operating under extreme physiological constraints, one whose apparent softness masks a life built on mechanical force, constant consumption, and ecological dominance. The kelp-wrapped body drifting at the surface is not resting in idleness, but recovering between bouts of intense labor, digesting shattered shells, and preparing to dive again into a world where survival depends on breaking things apart piece by piece. The forest around it, tall and green, owes its existence to that destruction, a paradox written into every swaying frond and shadowed rock. Understanding sea otters requires holding both images at once without flinching, the floating teddy bear and the shell crusher, the gentle face and the jaws that decide whether a forest stands or falls. Their story is not one of betrayal of cuteness, but of evolutionary honesty, a reminder that aesthetics mean nothing to natural selection, and that even the most endearing forms can house behaviors that shape ecosystems through violence applied with precision. In the cold shallows where kelp meets stone, the sea otter reigns not through fearsome size or speed, but through appetite, leverage, and an unyielding need to keep eating, a small predator with consequences far larger than its silhouette suggests. In shallow tropical bays where sunlight fans across pale sand and the water barely ripples, stingrays drift like loose shadows, their flattened bodies lifting and settling with the rhythm of the tide, wings undulating slowly, as if the seafloor itself has learned to breathe. From above, they resemble nothing more than relaxed underwater carpets, or kites resting just off the bottom, eyes perched calmly on top of their heads, mouths hidden below, tails trailing behind like ribbons. This posture, low, still, and unthreatening, has made stingrays one of the most misunderstood animals in coastal ecosystems, an image carefully cultivated by tourism as harmless, friendly, and safe to touch. People wade into ankle-deep water, expecting a gentle brush against the leg, or an Instagram moment of connection, unaware that beneath the soft silhouette lies one of the most efficient defensive weapons in the shallow sea. Stingrays are not predators of humans, nor do they seek confrontation. Yet their evolutionary history is written in environments where vulnerability invites death, and survival depends on instant, decisive responses rather than warning displays. Most species spend large portions of their lives partially buried in sand, covering themselves until only eyes and spiracles remain visible, a camouflage strategy that protects them from sharks and large predatory fish, while allowing them to ambush prey such as worms, crustaceans, and small fish. This buried existence shapes everything about their behavior, because an animal that relies on remaining unseen cannot afford hesitation when something steps too close. The stingray's defense is not built around threat or pursuit, but around reflex. A mechanical response triggered when pressure, vibration, or sudden shadow crosses a critical threshold. The tail is the key to this system, long, muscular, and flexible, equipped with one or more serrated barbs positioned like a concealed blade along its length. These barbs are not decorative spines, but hardened structures coated in a layer of venom producing tissue, designed to penetrate flesh and deliver a chemical deterrent directly into muscle. The venom itself is not intended to kill large animals, but to cause immediate intense pain, tissue damage, and neurological disruption, enough to force release and create an opportunity for escape. Evolution favored this design because it works reliably in the chaotic environment of shallow water, where vision is limited, escape routes are few, and contact often happens suddenly. When a stingray is startled, the movement is fast enough to surprise even experienced observers. A whip-like motion that arcs the tail upward and forward in a fraction of a second. This action is not aimed or calculated in the way a predator strike might be, but it is devastatingly effective because it occurs at close range and targets whatever part of the intruder is nearest. In shallow water, this is most often a lower leg or foot, as rays lie just beneath the surface of the sand. But arms, hands, and even the torso are at risk when people kneel, reach down, or attempt to touch the animal. The barb can penetrate deeply, driven by muscle power and body mass, embedding itself in flesh and tearing on withdrawal due to its backward-facing serrations. Accounts from shallow tourist bays around the world describe similar scenarios repeated with unsettling consistency as visitors wade into clear water without shuffling their feet, step directly onto a resting ray, and feel a sudden, searing pain that radiates upward with shocking intensity. The pain is often described as immediate and overwhelming, far beyond what the size of the wound would suggest, because the venom disrupts nerve signaling and causes localized muscle breakdown. Swelling follows quickly, mobility is compromised, and in some cases fragments of the barb break off inside the wound, complicating treatment and increasing the risk of infection. Ray feeding tours add another layer of risk, as they deliberately concentrate animals in confined areas and encourage close contact that would rarely occur in a natural setting. When rays are drawn in by food, they lose some of their natural spacing behavior, overlapping bodies and competing for access to handouts, while humans stand motionless or move unpredictably in the water. In these crowded conditions, rays are frequently bumped, stepped on, or pinned between legs and other rays, triggering defensive responses that are not directed at a specific individual, but at the sensation of entrapment itself. A single startled ray can whip its tail reflexively, striking the nearest limb regardless of intent, and when dozens of rays are present, the probability of accidental contact increases sharply. The misconception that stingrays are gentle comes in part from their feeding habits, as many species consume soft-bodied prey by suction, drawing food into their mouths with subtle movements that appear delicate and precise. This feeding style masks the strength of their jaw muscles and the power of their overall anatomy, which is built to generate strong downward pressure against the seafloor and to maneuver effectively despite a flattened body plan. Their wings, or pectoral fins, are thick and muscular, capable of lifting the entire animal off the bottom in a single motion, and their ability to accelerate suddenly contradicts the image of perpetual calm. Sensory adaptations further explain why stingrays respond the way they do when startled, as their primary awareness of the environment comes not from sight, but from electroreception and vibration detection. Specialized organs known as ampullae of Lorenzini allow rays to detect the weak electrical fields produced by living organisms, an ability that helps them locate prey hidden beneath sand, but also alerts them instantly to the presence of large animals nearby. When a human foot or hand enters this sensory field abruptly, the ray does not interpret it as a neutral object, but as a potential predator or crushing force, and the defensive response fires automatically. This response is not moderated by familiarity, because even rays accustomed to human presence retain the same reflex circuitry, as suppressing it would increase vulnerability to real predators. A ray that hesitates when stepped on does not gain anything by being tolerant, because tolerance offers no evolutionary reward, whereas immediate defense preserves the chance to survive the encounter. In this context, the sting is not an act of aggression, but a last line of defense activated when all other strategies have failed. The danger of stingray injuries extends beyond the initial wound, because the combination of venom, deep puncture, and marine bacteria creates a complex medical situation that requires prompt and appropriate treatment. The venom proteins cause intense pain and localized tissue damage, while bacteria introduced from the barb and surrounding water can lead to serious infection if the wound is not thoroughly cleaned and monitored. In rare but well-documented cases, barbs have penetrated critical areas such as the chest or abdomen, causing life-threatening injuries due to damage to internal organs or major blood vessels, a risk heightened when people kneel or fall onto a startled ray in shallow water. These realities stand in stark contrast to the curated image presented at attractions where rays are encouraged to glide past smiling visitors, their barbs sometimes removed or dulled in captive settings to reduce risk. Such practices create a false sense of security that does not translate to wild encounters, where rays retain their full defensive capabilities and respond to pressure without warning. Visitors leaving these attractions often carry the assumption that rays are safe everywhere, an assumption that proves dangerous when carried into natural habitats. Ecologically, stingrays play a crucial role in shaping benthic communities, as their feeding behavior disturbs sediment, redistributes nutrients, and influences the abundance of invertebrates living beneath the sand. This bioturbation creates microhabitats that benefit other species, contributing to the overall health of shallow coastal systems. Rays move slowly and deliberately because their role is not to chase, but to probe, excavate, and reset the seafloor in subtle ways, a process that requires calm persistence rather than speed. This ecological function explains why rays are so often found in the same shallow bays favored by humans, because these environments are rich in the invertebrates they consume and offer refuge from larger predators. It also explains why conflicts are increasing as coastal tourism expands, compressing space and forcing overlap between animals adapted to quiet, predictable environments and humans whose movements are erratic and whose numbers are overwhelming. Understanding stingrays requires accepting that calm behavior does not equal harmlessness, and that an animal can be both peaceful in intent and dangerous in outcome. The ray does not chase, threaten, or attack, yet it carries a hidden knife because evolution demanded it, and that knife deploys automatically when survival is at stake. Respecting this reality means adjusting human behavior rather than expecting animals to change, shuffling feet when entering shallow water, maintaining distance, and resisting the urge to touch or crowd wildlife for the sake of novelty. In the clear shallows where rays rest half-buried and the sand holds their outlines like temporary memories, safety depends on awareness rather than bravado. The ocean does not advertise its defenses, and stingrays do not display their weapons until the moment they are needed. Gentle appearance and lethal capability coexist in the same body not as a contradiction, but as a necessity, a reminder that in the wild, softness often conceals the sharpest edges, and that calm is not an invitation, but a condition that lasts only until it is disturbed. In the shallow reefs of tropical seas, where sunlight fractures into rippling bands of gold and coral heads rise like miniature cities, the clownfish announces itself not through size or power, but through visibility. Its orange body, edged in clean white bands and outlined in black, seems almost deliberately designed to stand out against the muted browns and greens of the reef, a living flag that signals presence rather than caution. To human eyes conditioned by animation and aquarium glass, this fish represents harmless charm, a friendly neighbor darting playfully among tentacles. Yet this first impression dissolves the moment proximity replaces observation. The clownfish is not a passive ornament of the reef, but a territorial defender shaped by one of the most extreme cost-benefit calculations in coral ecosystems, an animal that survives not by fleeing danger, but by meeting it head-on, regardless of size disparity. The center of this conflict is the sea anemone, a living fortress anchored to rock and coral, its tentacles armed with stinging cells potent enough to paralyze fish many times larger than a clownfish. For most reef inhabitants, an anemone is a lethal trap, a brush against its tentacles enough to trigger thousands of microscopic harpoons that inject venom and immobilize prey. For the clownfish, however, the anemone is home, shelter, nursery, and strategic stronghold, a resource so valuable that it justifies extraordinary aggression in its defense. This partnership is not accidental, but the product of co-evolution, as clownfish possess a specialized mucus coating that prevents the anemone's stinging cells from firing, allowing them to weave freely among tentacles that would kill almost any other fish. Gaining this protection is not automatic, even for a clownfish, because juveniles must acclimate gradually, brushing tentacles lightly and retreating repeatedly to build tolerance without triggering a fatal sting. Once established, the fish becomes effectively untouchable within its host, immune to the anemone's weapons while benefiting from their reach. In return, the clownfish defends the anemone aggressively, driving away butterfly fish and other species that would otherwise nibble on tentacles, improving water circulation with constant movement, and even fertilizing the anemone with waste nutrients. This exchange creates a micro-territory of immense value, a tiny patch of reef that offers safety, breeding opportunity, and long-term survival in an environment where shelter is scarce and competition relentless. The stakes of this relationship explain the clownfish's behavior toward intruders, because losing an anemone is not an inconvenience, but a potential death sentence. Without its host, a clownfish is exposed, brightly colored, and slow compared to open water species, an easy target for predators. As a result, clownfish evolve not to assess threats rationally by size or strength, but to attack immediately and persistently, escalating harassment until the intruder leaves. This strategy works not because the clownfish can overpower larger animals, but because most animals are risk-averse, preferring to avoid unnecessary conflict, especially when venomous tentacles lurk inches away. When a diver or snorkeler approaches an anemone, the clownfish does not hesitate or warn from a distance, but charges directly, darting forward with surprising speed and precision, aiming for exposed skin, masks, or gloves. These attacks are not isolated nips, but repeated assaults, delivered in rapid succession as the fish retreats briefly and then surges forward again, sometimes dozens of times within a single minute. The bites are small but sharp, and through thin gloves or bare skin, they can draw blood, leaving stinging cuts that feel disproportionate to the size of the attacker. The persistence is what surprises most people, because the fish does not retreat after contact, but returns again and again, driven by a simple rule that proximity equals threat. From the clownfish's perspective, this behavior is entirely logical, because the diver represents not a curious observer, but a massive, unpredictable presence capable of damaging or dislodging the anemone with a single careless fin kick. Coral reefs are fragile structures, and an anemone torn from its attachment may die, taking the clownfish's shelter and breeding site with it. In this context, aggression becomes prevention, an attempt to create discomfort early and consistently so that the intruder leaves before real harm can occur. The physiology of the clownfish supports this fearless strategy, as its small body houses a nervous system tuned for rapid response and high repetition rather than endurance or escape. Clownfish possess excellent spatial memory within their immediate territory, knowing the exact boundaries of safe retreat into the anemone and the angles from which to launch attacks while minimizing exposure. Their swimming style, quick bursts followed by abrupt stops, allows precise targeting in complex reef environments, while their mouths, though small, are equipped with sharp teeth capable of pinching and tearing skin effectively at close range. What makes these confrontations particularly ironic is the mismatch between human expectations and animal reality. Because the clownfish's popularity has conditioned people to expect friendliness or indifference rather than hostility. Animated narratives have transformed the species into a symbol of vulnerability and innocence, masking the fact that in the wild, clownfish rank among the most consistently aggressive reef fish relative to their size. This reputation is well known among experienced divers, who learn quickly to identify occupied anemones and give them a wide berth. Yet newcomers often learn through direct experience, surprised to find themselves chased and bitten by a fish small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. The aggression intensifies during breeding periods, when clownfish pairs guard eggs laid on the substrate near the anemone base. These eggs represent a significant investment, tended carefully by the male through fanning and cleaning until they hatch, and any disturbance during this time is met with heightened ferocity. Divers lingering near nesting sites may experience escalated attacks, with clownfish striking higher on the body or targeting the face and neck, areas that elicit stronger reactions and faster retreat. This is not random, but adaptive, as driving the intruder away quickly reduces the risk of egg predation or accidental damage. The social structure of clownfish adds another layer to this behavior, as they live in strict hierarchies within each anemone, typically consisting of a dominant breeding female, a breeding male, and several smaller subordinates. Only the top pair reproduces, and maintaining access to the anemone is essential for social stability, because displacement can trigger rank changes or exile. A clownfish that loses its anemone may not simply move on to another, as available hosts are limited and already defended, meaning that territory defense underpins not just individual survival, but social order. Ecologically, the clownfish-anemone partnership illustrates how reef systems are structured around small, high-value resources, defended intensely by specialized species. Anemones create microhabitats that increase local biodiversity, sheltering not only clownfish, but also shrimp and other commensal organisms that exploit the protection offered by stinging tentacles. By defending these spaces, clownfish indirectly shape species distribution at the scale of individual coral heads, influencing who can feed, hide, or reproduce in that immediate area. From a sensory perspective, clownfish rely heavily on visual cues and lateral line detection to monitor their territory, allowing them to detect approaching threats quickly, even in turbulent water. The sudden appearance of large shapes, such as divers descending from above, triggers immediate response, because vertical movement is uncommon among most reef fish predators, signaling abnormal and potentially dangerous intrusion. The clownfish does not wait to interpret intent, because evolution favors speed over nuance when the cost of hesitation is total exposure. There is also a chemical dimension to their fearlessness, as the mucus that protects clownfish from anemone stings may play a role in reducing sensitivity to certain irritants, allowing them to tolerate close contact with venomous tentacles and possibly contributing to their willingness to engage physically with threats. While this does not make them immune to pain or injury, it reinforces a lifestyle where proximity to danger is normalized rather than avoided. The broader irony is that clownfish aggression often succeeds precisely because it is unexpected, exploiting the psychological gap between appearance and behavior. A large predator charging a diver prompts calm retreat, while a tiny orange fish inspires amusement until the first bite lands. By the time the diver recognizes the seriousness of the defense, discomfort has already achieved its purpose, and the intruder backs away, leaving the anemone intact. In heavily visited reefs, repeated confrontations with humans can shape clownfish behavior further, as individuals learn which approaches are most effective at driving people away. Some target ankles and fins, others aim for hands holding cameras, exploiting predictable human reactions. This learning reflects the cognitive flexibility of reef fish, often underestimated by observers who equate intelligence with size or brain complexity, rather than ecological performance. Seen clearly, the clownfish is not a contradiction, but a textbook example of how evolutionary pressure shapes behavior precisely to match ecological context. Its bright colors advertise territory ownership rather than vulnerability. Its small size allows rapid acceleration and precise maneuvering, and its partnership with the anemone turns a lethal organism into an impenetrable fortress. The reef does not reward politeness or restraint, and the clownfish thrives by understanding this better than most. In the end, the neighborhood bully of the coral reef is not driven by malice, but by necessity. Defending a few square feet of safety in an environment where safety is rare and hard-won. The fact that this defender wears the face of a children's movie star says more about human storytelling than animal reality, a reminder that nature does not arrange itself according to our narratives. Beneath the cheerful stripes is a guardian shaped by fear, loyalty, and the relentless logic of survival, a fish that proves again and again that in the wild, size matters far less than resolve. From a distance, a penguin colony on land looks almost comical, a dense scatter of black and white bodies rocking side to side across rock, ice, and guano-stained ground, their upright posture and short strides creating the illusion of clumsiness that humans instinctively read as harmless. This impression is reinforced by the visual shorthand of the tuxedo pattern, a coincidence of coloration that mirrors formal wear closely enough to invite anthropomorphism, yet the moment the camera follows a single bird from the shoreline into the water, that illusion collapses with startling speed. The penguin does not transition gradually from awkward walker to capable swimmer. It transforms completely, its body rotating into a streamlined missile as gravity is replaced by buoyancy, and the same animal that struggled moments before now slices through the water with explosive acceleration, wings snapping tight arcs through the dense medium as it becomes one of the most efficient pursuit predators in the cold ocean. This transformation is not superficial, but the result of deep anatomical specialization that prioritizes underwater hunting at the expense of terrestrial grace. Penguins have sacrificed flight entirely, reshaping their wings into stiff, flattened flippers that function more like hydrofoils than limbs, generating lift and thrust simultaneously as they beat through the water. Their bones are dense rather than hollow, a reversal of the avian norm that reduces buoyancy and allows precise depth control during dives, while their bodies taper smoothly from chest to tail, minimizing drag and enabling rapid changes in direction as they chase agile prey. On land, this density and stiffness work against them, forcing an upright posture and a shuffling gait that looks inefficient to human eyes. Yet in the water, it becomes an advantage, turning the penguin into a compact engine built for speed, endurance, and impact. The beak, often overlooked amid the charm of facial markings, reveals the predator beneath the costume when examined closely, as it is narrow, sharp-edged, and reinforced to withstand repeated strikes against struggling prey. Penguins do not sip or nibble. They seize fish, squid, and krill with force, clamping down hard enough to prevent escape and swallowing their catch whole, often while still moving at speed. The interior of the beak and tongue is lined with backward-facing spines that act like barbs, ensuring that once prey enters the mouth it cannot be pushed back out, a design that compensates for the lack of chewing and allows rapid consumption during high-intensity feeding bouts. This same apparatus, when applied to a human hand or leg, can cause deep puncture wounds and tearing injuries, a reality that surprises tourists who mistake small size for low risk. Aggression on land is not an aberration, but an extension of the same survival logic that governs penguin life at sea, particularly during the breeding season when colonies become dense, noisy, and fiercely contested spaces. Penguins nest in environments where suitable sites are limited, whether on rocky ledges, sandy beaches, or exposed ice, and defending a territory is essential to reproductive success. When threatened or crowded, penguins respond not with flight but with confrontation, lunging forward, flippers outstretched for balance, beaks snapping toward perceived intruders with speed that belies their usual demeanor. These defensive strikes are targeted and deliberate, aimed at faces, hands, or any body part that enters range, and they are backed by powerful neck muscles evolved to deliver force during prey capture. Tourists who approach colonies too closely often trigger these responses without realizing it, especially when attempting to photograph nesting birds or chicks, inadvertently positioning themselves as looming threats rather than neutral observers. Penguins do not interpret slow movement or quiet voices as signs of safety because their evolutionary history contains no precedent for benevolent giants. Instead, size and proximity signal danger, and the appropriate response is to drive the threat away before it can do harm. The injuries that result, cuts, punctures, and bruises, are not accidents but predictable outcomes of an animal defending its reproductive investment in an environment where hesitation can mean failure. The true scale of penguin ferocity becomes most apparent during feeding events, when individuals that appear gentle and orderly on land dissolve into chaos beneath the surface. In productive waters, where currents bring nutrients to the surface, schools of fish and clouds of krill concentrate into dense patches that attract penguins in large numbers, triggering feeding frenzies that rival those of any marine predator. Birds dive repeatedly, accelerating toward prey at high speed, twisting and banking through the water column as they pursue individual targets or plunge headlong into swarms, snapping up multiple animals in rapid succession. The scene is violent, not in the sense of bloodshed, but in intensity, as hundreds or thousands of predators converge on a limited resource, each driven by the need to fuel a body that must remain warm in near-freezing water. Thermoregulation is a central pressure shaping penguin behavior, as these birds inhabit some of the coldest marine environments on Earth and must balance heat loss against energy intake with relentless precision. Their feathers form an exceptionally dense, overlapping layer that traps air against the skin, creating insulation comparable to that of fur, while a thick layer of fat beneath the skin provides additional protection and serves as an energy reserve during fasting periods. Countercurrent heat exchange in their flippers and legs minimizes thermal loss by routing warm blood past cooler returning blood, a system that allows extremities to remain functional without draining core temperature. Maintaining this balance requires constant feeding, especially during chick rearing, when adults must supply not only themselves but also their offspring, making efficient hunting a matter of survival rather than abundance. This metabolic demand explains why penguins cannot afford to be passive or tolerant when resources are at stake, whether those resources are fish at sea or nesting sites on land. A penguin that fails to feed adequately may not die immediately, but it will fall behind, losing body condition, becoming less effective at diving, and ultimately jeopardizing its ability to reproduce or survive harsh conditions. Aggression, in this context, is not excess, but economy, a way to secure space and food quickly without prolonged conflict that wastes energy. The underwater prowess that makes penguins such effective hunters also places them among the fastest swimming birds, capable of reaching speeds that allow them to overtake fish and evade predators such as seals and orcas. They achieve this not through brute force alone, but through refined control, adjusting wing angle and stroke frequency to optimize efficiency across different depths and prey types. Some species execute porpoising behavior, bursting out of the water repeatedly during long swims to reduce drag and breathe without slowing, a tactic that conserves energy during travel between feeding grounds and colonies. This level of specialization underscores how misleading the waddling gait truly is, as it reflects a trade-off rather than incompetence, the cost of reshaping a bird into a near-perfect underwater predator. Interactions with humans at sea reveal another dimension of this mismatch in perception, as penguins encountering swimmers or divers may approach rapidly out of curiosity or territorial instinct, closing distance faster than expected and delivering defensive pecks if startled. While such encounters are rare compared to land-based incidents, they reinforce the reality that penguins do not recognize humans as neutral background elements, but as large animals capable of disrupting their routines. In regions where tourism has increased, repeated exposure can lead to heightened stress responses, altering feeding and breeding behavior in ways that ripple through populations over time. Ecologically, penguins occupy a crucial role as mid to upper level predators that transfer energy from plankton and small fish up the food web, linking ocean productivity to land-based breeding colonies through guano deposition that fertilizes surrounding ecosystems. Their feeding choices influence the distribution and abundance of prey species, while their presence attracts larger predators that shape the structure of marine communities. Removing or disturbing penguin populations does not simply reduce numbers of a charismatic species, it alters the flow of nutrients and energy across entire systems, a reminder that behind the charming exterior lies an animal embedded deeply in ecological processes that operate without sentiment. Understanding penguins as torpedoes rather than toys requires abandoning the comforting narrative that intelligence or aesthetic appeal softens the realities of predation, because the tuxedo pattern is camouflage as much as costume, dark backs blending into deep water when seen from above, and pale bellies merging with surface light when seen from below. This countershading, shared with many marine animals, is a functional adaptation that reduces visibility to prey and predators alike, a visual reminder that the penguin's elegance underwater is not accidental, but earned through millions of years of selective pressure. The next time a penguin is seen shuffling across ice or posing patiently for photographs, it is worth remembering that this is merely the intermission between hunts, a brief pause in a life defined by speed, force, and precision beneath the waves. The torpedo waits inside the suit, powered by hunger, insulated against cold, and armed with a beak that knows exactly how hard to bite. An animal whose apparent innocence dissolves the instant it returns to the element that shaped it. At the edge of many harbors, marinas, and quiet coves, seals and sea lions have become part of the human shoreline scenery, their rounded heads bobbing in the water like curious buoys, dark eyes reflecting light with an expression that reads as gentle interest rather than calculation. They haul themselves onto docks, floating platforms, and rocky ledges with apparent ease, stacking their bodies together in loose piles that rise and fall with slow breathing, whiskers twitching as boats pass and divers slip into the water nearby. To an untrained observer, this scene feels benign, even welcoming, as though the ocean has offered up a set of friendly sentinels eager to share space. Yet this calm surface hides an animal whose relationship with territory, food, and personal space is governed by pressures far older and less forgiving than modern tourism. Seals and sea lions occupy a liminal zone between land and sea, a boundary environment where access points are limited and competition is constant, and haul-out sites are not casual resting places, but strategic assets essential for survival. These locations allow pinnipeds to rest, thermoregulate, give birth, nurse young, and escape aquatic predators. And because suitable sites are finite, they are defended with intensity that often surprises humans who mistake proximity for permission. Harbor seals, despite their smaller size compared to some relatives, display a strong attachment to specific haul-out areas, returning repeatedly and reacting aggressively when displaced, while sea lions, larger and more overtly assertive, frequently dominate docks and buoys through vocalizations, posturing, and direct physical force. Territorial behavior in these animals is shaped by their need to balance energy intake with safety, because hauling out reduces heat loss and metabolic demands after long periods in cold water, allowing seals to conserve energy rather than burning calories constantly swimming. A seal forced to abandon a preferred haul-out site pays an immediate physiological cost, losing rest time and increasing exposure to stress, which in turn drives a lower threshold for aggressive responses. When humans approach too closely, attempt to share space, or linger at dive entry points near these sites, seals interpret the intrusion not as curiosity, but as a threat to a critical resource, and their reactions are shaped accordingly. Surprise lunges from the water are one of the most common and misunderstood expressions of this defensive strategy, as seals are capable of explosive bursts of speed that propel their bodies upward with little warning. A seal resting just below the surface can launch itself toward an intruder in a fraction of a second, jaws open, teeth fully exposed, creating an encounter that feels shocking and sudden precisely because it violates human expectations of slow, passive behavior. These lunges are not random or playful gestures, but clear attempts to intimidate and drive away perceived threats, relying on the element of surprise to establish dominance without prolonged conflict. The teeth that power these warnings are not decorative, despite their frequent concealment behind whiskered muzzles and rounded faces, but robust tools evolved to seize and subdue slippery prey. Harbor seals possess sharp, recurved teeth designed to grip fish and prevent escape, while sea lions combine similar dentition with powerful jaws capable of crushing and tearing. These teeth are anchored by strong jaw muscles that allow rapid closure and sustained pressure, traits essential for hunting but equally effective in inflicting damage during defensive encounters with humans. Injuries resulting from seal and sea lion bites are not hypothetical or rare, but well documented in coastal regions where human activity overlaps with pinniped habitat. People attempting to pet, feed, or photograph these animals at close range have suffered deep puncture wounds to hands, arms, legs, and faces, often requiring medical treatment beyond basic first aid. The severity of these injuries is amplified by the context in which they occur. As bites often happen in water where balance is compromised, reactions are delayed, and victims may struggle to extricate themselves quickly from the animal's reach. What makes these bites particularly dangerous, beyond the immediate trauma, is the biological reality of the seal's mouth, which harbors a complex community of bacteria adapted to a carnivorous diet and marine environment. These bacteria, while harmless to the seal, can cause severe infections in humans when introduced into tissue through puncture wounds, leading to rapidly spreading inflammation, abscess formation, and in some cases systemic illness if not treated promptly. Medical literature documents infections from pinnipede bites that require aggressive antibiotic therapy and surgical intervention, a risk often underestimated by those who view seals as no more threatening than large dogs. The bacterial load in a seal's mouth reflects its ecological role as a predator that consumes raw fish, squid, and invertebrates, often swallowing prey whole and carrying remnants in its oral cavity for extended periods. This environment fosters microorganisms well suited to breaking down protein-rich material, organisms that thrive in saline conditions and exploit any opportunity to colonize damaged tissue. When a seal bites a human, it delivers not just mechanical injury, but a biological payload shaped by millions of years of evolutionary adaptation to marine feeding. Feeding behavior further complicates interactions with humans, particularly in areas where seals and sea lions have learned to associate people with easy meals. In fishing harbors and tourist hotspots, pinnipeds quickly adapt to the presence of discarded fish, bait, and handouts, learning that approaching boats or divers can yield food with minimal effort. This conditioning alters their behavior, reducing natural wariness and increasing assertiveness, as animals begin to compete directly with humans for resources rather than avoiding them. Once seals perceive humans as food sources or competitors, their tolerance for close contact diminishes, and behaviors escalate from passive observation to active harassment. Seals may follow divers closely, nip at fins, grab equipment, or position themselves aggressively between people and perceived food, actions that are often misinterpreted as playful curiosity, but are better understood as resource-driven interactions governed by dominance and control. When food does not materialize as expected, frustration can lead to sudden bites, particularly if a human's movements resemble struggling prey. Sea lions, with their larger size and more social dominant structures, often amplify these dynamics, as males in particular are accustomed to using physical force to establish hierarchy within colonies. A large sea lion defending a dock or buoy may lunge repeatedly at approaching swimmers, vocalizing loudly and using its bulk to intimidate. And if these warnings are ignored, contact can follow quickly. The speed and agility with which these animals move in water gives them a decisive advantage, allowing them to dictate the terms of any encounter. Underlying these behaviors is a sensory world tuned to detect subtle changes in water movement and sound, enabling seals to perceive approaching humans long before they are seen. Their whiskers, or vibrissae, are highly sensitive organs capable of detecting minute pressure changes created by swimming fish or moving bodies, allowing seals to track motion even in low visibility conditions. This sensory acuity means that seals are rarely surprised by human presence, and when they appear suddenly at the surface or launch toward an intruder, it is not because they were startled, but because they chose that moment to act. Thermoregulation also plays a role in shaping seal behavior near haul-out sites, as resting out of the water allows seals to reduce heat loss and conserve energy, particularly in colder climates. Disturbances that force seals back into the water disrupt this balance, increasing metabolic demands and reducing time available for rest and digestion, pressures that accumulate quickly and drive defensive responses. A seal repeatedly flushed from a haul-out site may become increasingly aggressive over time, responding more rapidly and forcefully to any perceived threat as stress builds. From an ecological perspective, seals and sea lions serve as important predators that influence fish populations and nutrient cycling within coastal systems, transporting energy from offshore feeding grounds back to land through waste deposition and physical presence. Their interactions with humans are a byproduct of overlapping ecological niches, where both species seek access to the same productive coastal zones, albeit for different reasons. When humans forget that these animals are wild predators rather than coastal mascots, conflict becomes inevitable. The appeal of big eyes and expressive faces is deeply rooted in human psychology, triggering caregiving instincts that evolve to protect infants rather than assess risk. And seals exploit this bias inadvertently by possessing features that resemble those cues. This mismatch between appearance and behavior lies at the heart of many dangerous encounters, as people approach with expectations shaped by emotion rather than ecology. The seal, operating under evolutionary logic, responds not to cuteness but to proximity, movement, and resource competition. Recognizing seals as capable territorial predators does not diminish their value or importance, but reframes the relationship in terms of respect rather than familiarity. These animals thrive when allowed to maintain natural boundaries, haul out without harassment, and forage without human interference, conditions that reduce stress and aggression while preserving the integrity of coastal ecosystems. When those boundaries are ignored, the consequences are written not only in injured hands and infected wounds, but in altered behavior that ripples outward, affecting entire populations. At the water's edge, where seals rest and watch with dark, unblinking eyes, the line between calm and conflict is thinner than it appears, defined by distance, restraint, and an honest understanding of what lies behind the whiskers. Big eyes may draw attention, but big teeth enforce the rules of coexistence, reminding anyone who lingers too close that the ocean's residents do not surrender their instincts simply because humans find them charming. In the shallow margins of coral reefs and rocky shorelines, sea anemones present one of the most convincing illusions in the marine world, appearing as nothing more than soft, swaying flowers rooted to stone, their tentacles fanning gently in the current like petals responding to a breeze. Their colors range from pale greens and translucent whites to deep reds, purples, and electric blues, hues that invite curiosity rather than caution, and their stillness reinforces the impression that they are passive, harmless fixtures of the underwater landscape. Snorkelers drift closer. Photographers extend hands to steady themselves, and fingers reach out instinctively toward what looks like living silk, unaware that this apparent softness conceals one of the most sophisticated and explosive defensive systems ever evolved by an animal. Sea anemones are not plants, despite their appearance, but highly specialized predators belonging to the same ancient lineage as jellyfish and corals, a group defined by radial symmetry and a reliance on chemical and mechanical weaponry rather than speed or strength. Anchored permanently to the substrate, an anemone cannot flee danger or chase prey, and this immobility has shaped every aspect of its biology, favoring instant, overwhelming responses over gradual escalation. Each tentacle is armed with thousands of microscopic capsules called nematocysts, each one containing a tightly coiled, barbed thread loaded with venom, held under immense internal pressure and ready to fire at the slightest provocation. When triggered by touch, chemical cues, or changes in water movement, these capsules discharge faster than the blink of an eye, driving their harpoons directly into whatever has made contact. To the human nervous system, this process is perceived not as a single sting, but as a sudden bloom of pain, heat, and irritation that spreads outward from the point of contact, often lingering far longer than expected. Mild encounters may produce little more than itching, redness, or a burning sensation that fades over hours, yet even these reactions surprise people who expected a texture rather than an attack. More serious stings involve deeper penetration of nematocyst threads into the skin, delivering toxins that disrupt nerve signaling and cellular function, leading to swelling, blistering, and intense pain that can persist for days. In some individuals, especially those with heightened sensitivity, allergic responses amplify these effects, producing systemic symptoms such as nausea, dizziness, or difficulty breathing that require medical attention. The danger lies not only in the potency of the venom, but in the sheer number of stinging cells activated during contact, because grabbing or pressing against an anemone triggers thousands of nematocysts simultaneously, each injecting its payload into the skin. Unlike a single insect sting, which delivers a defined dose of venom from a localized source, an anemone sting is distributed across a wide area, overwhelming the body's ability to isolate and neutralize the toxins quickly. This explains why people who wrap fingers around tentacles or brace themselves against an anemone-covered rock often experience more severe reactions than those who brush past accidentally, as prolonged contact allows repeated firing and deeper penetration. Some anemone species elevate this threat further by producing venoms with complex chemical compositions that include neurotoxins and cytolysins, compounds capable of damaging nerve tissue and breaking down cell membranes. These toxins evolved not to deter humans, but to immobilize prey rapidly and deter predators such as fish, sea stars, and nudibranches that might otherwise graze on tentacles. In ecological terms, the sting is a feeding mechanism first and a defense second, enabling anemones to capture plankton, small fish, and crustaceans that drift too close, pulling them inward toward a central mouth once movement ceases. The feeding process reveals how misleading the flower comparison truly is, because when prey is ensnared, the anemone's tentacles contract with surprising strength, folding inward and transferring the immobilized animal toward the oral disc, where digestion begins externally before ingestion. Enzymes break down tissue even as the prey is drawn into the gastrovascular cavity, a simple yet effective system that maximizes nutrient extraction in an environment where meals are unpredictable. This efficiency allows anemones to thrive in nutrient-poor waters, where competition for food is intense, anchoring themselves in optimal positions and letting the ocean deliver sustenance directly into their grasp. Human encounters often occur precisely because anemones occupy visually striking and accessible locations, clustering on shallow reefs, tide pools, and rocky outcrops favored by snorkelers and beachgoers. In these environments, people frequently underestimate the reach and sensitivity of tentacles, assuming that slow movement or gentle touch will avoid triggering a sting. This assumption fails because nematocysts respond not to intention but to contact, and even a light brush is enough to activate them. The anemone does not distinguish between prey, predator, or curious primate, because its survival strategy depends on treating all contact as potential threat or opportunity. Photographs and videos contribute to this misunderstanding, as images of divers hovering inches from anemones without apparent consequence suggest safety where there is none. What these images often omit is the experience of those who misjudged distance or reached out impulsively, learning through pain that proximity carries a price. In crowded tourist areas, repeated handling of anemones for photographs increases the likelihood of severe stings, both by encouraging risky behavior and by stressing the animals, potentially making them more reactive to disturbance. The relationship between anemones and their symbiotic partners adds another layer of complexity to human interactions, because species such as clownfish move freely among tentacles without harm, reinforcing the illusion of gentleness. This immunity is not universal, but highly specific, the result of specialized mucus coatings that prevent nematocyst discharge, a trait refined through coevolution rather than casual tolerance. Humans lack any such protection, and attempts to mimic clownfish behavior by touching or handling anemones ignore the precise biochemical adaptations required to avoid being stung. Beyond immediate injury, repeated stings can have cumulative effects, particularly in sensitive individuals or when venom exposure is extensive. Prolonged pain, persistent inflammation, and delayed healing are common outcomes of severe encounters, and secondary infection can occur if broken skin is exposed to marine bacteria. In rare cases, anaphylactic reactions develop rapidly, underscoring that even organisms perceived as simple or stationary can pose serious health risks when misunderstood. Ecologically, anemones occupy an important niche as both predators and habitat formers, influencing reef structure and species distribution through their presence. Their stinging defenses create zones of exclusion that shape the behavior of nearby organisms, deterring some while attracting others that exploit the protection anemones provide. This dynamic contributes to the patchwork nature of reef ecosystems, where small territories exert outsized influence on local biodiversity. Anemones that are damaged or removed disrupt these relationships, affecting not only themselves, but the network of species that depend on them. The irony of the sea anemone lies in how its danger is hidden in plain sight, advertised neither by sharp teeth nor rapid movement, but by beauty and stillness that disarm caution. Its weaponry is invisible until activated, its response instantaneous and unapologetic, a reminder that evolution often favors subtlety over spectacle. In the underwater world, the most effective defenses are not always those that announce themselves, but those that wait quietly until contact is made. Understanding sea anemones requires abandoning the comfort of plant analogies and accepting them as what they are. Ancient animals perfected for a life without retreat, capable of delivering pain disproportionate to their size or appearance. Respecting them means maintaining distance, observing without touching, and recognizing that their apparent calm is not an invitation, but a state maintained by boundaries. In the end, the flower that burns teaches a simple lesson repeated across the natural world: that beauty and danger are not opposites, but often partners, and that curiosity without restraint carries consequences written into the biology of even the most delicate forms. In sheltered lagoons, seagrass meadows and quiet reef edges where currents slow and light filters gently through the water, seahorses drift almost unnoticed, upright bodies swaying with the motion of the sea like fragments of living vegetation. Their shapes echo the environment around them, curled tails mimicking tendrils, knobby contours blending with algae and coral rubble, colors shifting subtly to match surrounding textures. To encounter a seahorse in the wild feels intimate, as though the ocean has revealed something private and delicate, a creature that does not flee but waits, trusting camouflage and stillness to carry it through another day. This quiet presence, combined with a face that resembles a tiny horse and eyes that move independently with an almost expressive quality, triggers an immediate human response that is rarely questioned. The urge to get closer, to touch, to lift, to stage a photograph that captures the moment. In that instant, the danger does not come from the animal to the human, but entirely in the opposite direction. Seahorses are among the slowest and least physically resilient fishes in the ocean, not because evolution neglected them, but because they evolved to survive in a very specific ecological niche, where speed and strength are replaced by stealth, precision, and extreme specialization. Their bodies are encased not in flexible scales, but in rigid, bony plates fused together beneath thin skin, forming an external armor that protects against abrasion and minor predation, but severely limits flexibility and shock absorption. This armor gives the illusion of toughness, yet it comes at a cost, because any sudden force applied to the body is transferred directly to internal organs without the cushioning provided by muscle mass or pliable tissue. When a human hand grips a seahorse, even gently by human standards, the pressure can be enough to damage joints, compress organs, or disrupt the delicate balance that keeps the animal alive. The tail, so often admired for its curling elegance and gripping ability, is particularly vulnerable because it is composed of a series of small, interlocking bony rings designed for slow, controlled grasping rather than forceful restraint. In the wild, the tail anchors the seahorse to seagrass blades, coral branches, or sponges, allowing it to remain stable in moving water while conserving energy. When that tail is pulled, bent, or straightened by an external force, dislocation can occur at the joints, breaking the structural integrity that allows the seahorse to hold position. Unlike many fishes, seahorses cannot recover easily from such injuries, as their limited mobility and specialized feeding strategy leave little margin for physical impairment. Their skin, too, is far more fragile than it appears, lacking the thick mucus layers that protect many reef fishes from abrasion and infection. Seahorse skin is thin and highly permeable, facilitating gas exchange and subtle color changes, but offering minimal defense against rough surfaces or handling. Contact with dry hands, gloves, or camera equipment can strip away protective mucus, creating entry points for bacteria and parasites that flourish in marine environments. Even brief handling can result in infections that develop hours or days later, long after the human has left the water, leaving the cause invisible and the outcome fatal. Stress is the silent killer in these interactions, because seahorses are physiologically ill-equipped to cope with sudden changes in pressure, orientation, or environmental conditions. Their swim bladders, which regulate buoyancy, are finely tuned to the depth at which they normally live, and rapid vertical movement caused by lifting a seahorse toward the surface or repositioning it for a photograph can disrupt this balance. Barotrauma, the damage caused by pressure change, can rupture internal tissues or leave the animal unable to control its position in the water, resulting in uncontrolled floating or sinking that makes feeding and anchoring impossible. Feeding itself is an exercise in precision rather than abundance, as seahorses rely on a sight and weight strategy, consuming tiny crustaceans that drift within range of their tubular snouts. They lack teeth and stomachs, meaning food passes quickly through their digestive system and must be replenished constantly to meet metabolic demands. A stressed or injured seahorse often stops feeding altogether, either because it cannot maintain position to hunt effectively, or because physiological stress suppresses appetite. In an animal already operating near the edge of energetic balance, even short periods without food can be fatal. Photographers and snorkelers often believe that placing a seahorse on a more visible perch or gently holding it for a better angle does no lasting harm, especially when the animal appears calm or motionless during the interaction. This calm is misleading because seahorses do not thrash or struggle in ways humans recognize as distress, relying instead on immobility as a primary survival strategy. A seahorse that remains still in a hand is not relaxed or cooperative, but overwhelmed, its stress response unfolding internally in ways that offer no immediate visual cues. The irony is that the very traits that make seahorses resilient in their natural environment, camouflage, stillness, and low metabolic output, make them catastrophically vulnerable to human interference. In a meadow of seagrass, these traits allow a seahorse to disappear from the notice of predators, conserving energy and avoiding detection. Yet in the presence of humans, they invite manipulation rather than distance. A faster fish flees, a venomous one warns, a large one intimidates. But the seahorse does none of these things, and so it is touched, moved, and posed, not because people intend harm, but because nothing in the animal's behavior discourages it. Reproductive biology adds another layer of fragility, because seahorses invest heavily in each breeding attempt, with males carrying fertilized eggs in specialized brood pouches until fully formed young are released. This process demands stable environmental conditions, and significant physiological resources and stress can interrupt it at any stage, causing males to abort broods or females to cease courtship altogether. In heavily visited dive sites where seahorses are repeatedly handled or disturbed, local populations may decline not through direct mortality alone, but through suppressed reproduction that quietly erodes numbers over time. Ecologically, seahorses serve as indicators of habitat health, their presence signaling intact seagrass beds and complex microhabitats capable of supporting delicate life histories. When seahorses disappear, it often reflects broader degradation, pollution, or physical disturbance that affects many species less visibly. Human handling accelerates this process by removing individuals from already marginal environments, compounding pressures that seahorses cannot escape through migration or rapid adaptation. There is a cruel symmetry in how harm occurs, because the seahorse does not injure humans, frighten them, or impose consequences through force. Yet the interaction still ends badly, with the animal absorbing all the damage while the human walks away unaware. This asymmetry makes seahorses uniquely dependent on restraint rather than fear for their protection, a dependence that is rarely honored in crowded tourist settings where novelty and imagery outweigh ecological understanding. The moral embedded in this story is not abstract but immediate and personal, because every injured seahorse represents a moment when curiosity overrode responsibility, when the desire to possess an experience eclipsed the reality of what the animal could withstand. Unlike encounters with predators or venomous creatures, there is no dramatic warning, no sudden pain to teach the lesson quickly. The lesson unfolds quietly after the interaction ends, as stress compounds, injuries fester, and a creature that survived months or years in the wild succumbs to a few minutes of human attention. Seen clearly, the seahorse is not weak in the sense of evolutionary failure, but exquisitely adapted to a narrow window of conditions that humans are rapidly closing. Its survival strategy works perfectly when left alone and collapses entirely when disturbed, making it a mirror for our broader relationship with fragile ecosystems that appear resilient until they are handled too roughly. The damage is not visible on the human hand, but it is written into the seahorse's body, a cost paid by an animal that never consented to be part of a photograph. In the slow sway of seagrass, where a seahorse curls its tail and waits for the next passing current to bring food within reach, there is no aggression, no threat, and no defense against curiosity. It is a creature that does not hurt others, only itself, when the balance it depends on is broken. The responsibility then lies entirely with us, to recognize that some of the ocean's most extraordinary lives are preserved not through interaction, but through restraint, and that the most meaningful encounter is the one that leaves no trace at all. At low tide along tropical shores and temperate coastlines, starfish cling to rocks like living ornaments, their arms spread wide against stone as waves slide past and sunlight glints off shallow pools. Children point. Tourists crouch for photos, and hands reach instinctively toward these familiar shapes that seem more like decorations than animals. Icons stamped onto postcards and beach towels as symbols of harmless ocean life. They do not flee, hiss, or bite in any visible way, and their stillness reinforces the assumption that they are passive, sturdy, and safe to touch. Yet this calm exterior hides an animal built on a radically different blueprint of survival, one that relies on chemical defenses, hydraulic force, and a feeding strategy so alien that it rarely registers as predation at all, even while it reshapes entire reef systems beneath the surface. Starfish, more properly called sea stars, are not simple creatures frozen in place, but active predators and ecosystem engineers whose bodies operate on principles unlike those of most animals people encounter. Their movement is powered not by muscles pulling against bones, but by a water vascular system, a network of fluid-filled canals that inflate and deflate hundreds of tiny tube feet, allowing them to grip, pull, and pry with remarkable strength. These tube feet end in suction cups capable of adhering tightly to rock, coral, and shell, enabling starfish to resist waves, predators, and even determined human hands. When someone tries to peel a starfish from a rock, they are not lifting a loose object, but attempting to overpower a coordinated hydraulic system designed to withstand constant physical stress. The danger in this interaction is twofold, affecting both the human and the animal in ways that are rarely immediate or obvious. Some species, most infamously the crown-of-thorns starfish, are armed with long, sharp spines, coated in venomous compounds that serve as a powerful deterrent to predators. These spines puncture skin easily, breaking off inside wounds and delivering toxins that cause intense pain, swelling, and inflammation. What begins as a small puncture can quickly escalate into a serious injury, as marine bacteria introduced by the spine thrive in the damaged tissue, leading to infection that may require medical treatment. The pain can persist for days or weeks, and in sensitive individuals, systemic reactions such as nausea, dizziness, or joint pain have been documented, all from an animal that most people assume cannot hurt them. Even starfish without venomous spines can cause harm through abrasion and bacterial transfer, as their rough surfaces and microscopic skeletal elements scrape skin and create entry points for infection. Tide pools, where many starfish encounters occur, are environments rich in microorganisms adapted to warm, nutrient-dense conditions, and wounds acquired there are particularly prone to complications. The absence of immediate pain often leads people to underestimate the injury, delaying care until inflammation and infection become severe. The greater and more lasting damage often falls on the starfish itself, because removal from its substrate disrupts physiological processes that evolved under very specific environmental constraints. Starfish respire through delicate structures called papillae, thin extensions of the body wall that allow gas exchange directly with seawater. When a starfish is lifted into the air, even briefly, these structures collapse and dry, impairing respiration and exposing internal tissues to stress. Prolonged exposure, handling, or placement on dry surfaces can lead to tissue damage that is not immediately visible, setting the stage for infection or necrosis that unfolds hours or days later. Ripping a starfish from rock intensifies this harm, as tube feet and underlying tissues can tear under force, leaving injuries that compromise the animal's ability to move, feed, or defend itself. While starfish are famous for their regenerative abilities, this reputation often leads to the false belief that they are nearly indestructible, capable of recovering easily from any injury. Regeneration is not a magical reset, but an energy-intensive, time-consuming process that depends on stable conditions and adequate nutrition. A starfish that loses tissue must divert resources from feeding and reproduction to repair, leaving it vulnerable to disease, predation, and starvation during the recovery period. The irony is that regeneration itself is often misunderstood, as not all starfish can regrow entire bodies from fragments, and even those that can require precise conditions for survival. Many injuries inflicted during handling do not result in clean separations that facilitate regrowth, but in ragged tears and internal damage that overwhelm the animal's capacity to heal. In these cases, the starfish does not regenerate. It simply dies slowly, out of sight, reinforcing the illusion that no harm was done because the death is delayed rather than immediate. Beyond individual suffering, the removal or injury of starfish carries ecological consequences that ripple through reef and rocky shore systems. Starfish are keystone predators in many environments, exerting outsized influence on community structure through their feeding behavior. Their most infamous representatives, crown-of-thorns starfish, feed almost exclusively on living coral, everting their stomachs onto coral surfaces and digesting tissue externally before absorbing the nutrients. In balanced systems, their populations are kept in check by predators and environmental conditions, but when those controls weaken, outbreaks can devastate reefs, stripping coral cover and altering habitat complexity for years or decades. Handling crown-of-thorns starfish is particularly dangerous, both medically and ecologically, because stressed or injured individuals may release gametes or chemical cues that influence nearby starfish behavior. In some cases, physical disturbance has been linked to increased aggregation or spawning, potentially exacerbating population explosions rather than mitigating them. What appears to be a simple act of removal or relocation can therefore contribute to broader reef degradation if not guided by scientific management. Other starfish species play equally important roles, preying on mussels, clams, and barnacles, and preventing any single species from dominating the substrate. This balance maintains biodiversity and allows complex communities to persist. When starfish are removed from tide pools or reefs, even temporarily, competitive dynamics shift, often favoring fast-growing organisms that crowd out others, simplifying the ecosystem. The absence of starfish predators can lead to monocultures that reduce habitat quality for fish and invertebrates, demonstrating how even small disturbances can cascade through marine systems. The feeding behavior that underpins this influence is itself deeply alien to human intuition, because starfish do not possess jaws or teeth in the conventional sense, yet they feed with relentless effectiveness. Using the coordinated pull of hundreds of tube feet, a starfish can pry open the shells of bivalves by fractions of a millimeter, maintaining pressure for hours until the prey's muscles fatigue. The starfish then everts its stomach into the opening, releasing digestive enzymes that liquefy the prey's tissues externally before retracting the stomach and absorbing the nutrients. This slow, methodical predation leaves little visible drama, yet it is a powerful reminder that stillness does not equate to passivity. The sensory world of starfish further explains why handling them provokes stress responses that are invisible to humans. Starfish lack centralized brains, but they possess a distributed nervous system capable of detecting chemical cues, light gradients, and physical pressure across their entire bodies. When lifted or manipulated, this system registers widespread disturbance, triggering physiological stress responses that affect circulation, digestion, and immune function. The animal cannot localize or escape the threat because its body is the threat's point of contact, a situation evolution never prepared it to endure calmly. The cultural perception of starfish as souvenirs or decorations reinforces harmful behavior, encouraging people to treat living animals as objects rather than participants in ecological processes. Social media images of starfish held aloft against blue water normalize handling, obscuring the biological cost behind a momentary visual reward. Each such interaction teaches others that the behavior is acceptable, multiplying its impact across crowded coastlines and popular destinations. There is a profound mismatch between the timescale of human experience and the timescale of starfish survival, because humans interact briefly and move on, while the consequences for the animal unfold slowly and invisibly. A starfish torn from its rock and replaced may appear unchanged, yet internal damage, infection, or stress-induced starvation may end its life days later. The beach remains beautiful, the tide pool still, and the lesson goes unlearned. Understanding starfish requires abandoning the notion that danger must announce itself through speed, teeth, or sound. because their defenses and vulnerabilities operate quietly, embedded in chemistry, hydraulics, and ecological relationships that are easy to overlook. Some can hurt you through venomous spines that punish curiosity instantly, while all can be harmed by hands that mistake stillness for permission. In the end, the beach icon reveals itself as something far more complex and consequential than its flattened shape suggests. A predator without teeth, a defender without pursuit, and a victim of misunderstanding rather than malice. The reef depends on its presence, its slow movements, and its invisible labor. And when people remove or injure starfish for novelty or photographs, they do not just harm an individual, but tug at the threads that hold coastal ecosystems together. The lesson carried by the starfish is quiet but uncompromising, written not in dramatic encounters, but in gradual imbalance and unseen loss. Some animals do not teach respect through fear or force, but through fragility paired with importance, and the responsibility to recognize that combination rests entirely with us. Along rocky shorelines and coral-fringed coasts, crabs appear everywhere at once and nowhere in particular, materializing from crevices as the tide recedes, freezing mid-step when shadows pass overhead, then scuttling sideways with an awkward urgency that reads as harmless comedy rather than intent. In tide pools, small shore crabs cling to stone with spindly legs, claws raised more in posture than threat, while larger reef-dwelling species lurk beneath ledges, their eyes protruding like periscopes from armored bodies that seem more toy than predator. This sideways walk, paired with compact size and exaggerated proportions, has earned crabs a reputation as playful background characters of the coast, creatures to be poked, picked up or teased without consequence. That reputation collapses the moment pressure is applied in the wrong place, because behind the cartoon silhouette lies one of the most mechanically powerful feeding tools in the shallow sea. Crabs are not built for speed or grace, but for force, leverage, and persistence, traits that define life in environments where prey is often encased in armor and survival depends on breaking rather than chasing. Their claws, or chelae, are not hands, but specialized crushing devices, evolved independently across multiple crab lineages to solve the same problem of accessing hard-shelled food. A single claw may be asymmetrical, with one enlarged crusher and one slimmer cutter, each optimized for different tasks, while the muscles that operate them are anchored inside the carapace and connected through a system of levers that amplify force far beyond what the crab's size would suggest. When a crab closes its claw, it does so with slow, deliberate pressure rather than a snap, generating crushing strength capable of cracking mollusk shells, breaking coral fragments, and reducing thick exoskeletons to splinters. This force is not hypothetical or exaggerated, as it is measured daily on the reef and shore through the remains of prey scattered across rocks and sand. Snail shells shattered cleanly at the aperture, barnacles pried from stone and crushed, clams forced open millimeter by millimeter until muscle fatigue allows entry, all testify to a feeding strategy based on patience and power rather than speed. A crab does not need to rush, because once it has a grip, escape becomes nearly impossible, and the same physics apply when a human finger replaces a snail shell in the equation. Most injuries involving crabs occur not because the animal attacks unprovoked, but because humans misjudge how a crab perceives restraint and threat. When picked up incorrectly, held from the top or sides, or dangled by legs, a crab responds instinctively by bringing its claws toward the nearest point of contact. This is not aggression, but a reflexive attempt to secure leverage, and once the claw closes, it does not release easily. Crabs lack the neurological wiring to assess intent or negotiate escape, and their default response to resistance is to tighten grip rather than let go. Fishermen learn this lesson early, often painfully, when handling crabs caught in nets or traps. A crab entangled in mesh is already stressed, its limbs pulled into unnatural positions, sensory input overwhelmed by pressure and vibration, and when a hand reaches in carelessly, the claw snaps shut with mechanical certainty. The resulting pinch can split skin, bruise bone, or in the case of larger species, fracture fingers outright. Injuries compounded by the fact that crabs often twist while gripping, increasing tissue damage as they attempt to free themselves. Children exploring tide pools encounter the same risk through curiosity rather than occupation, lifting small crabs under the assumption that size correlates with safety. A crab no larger than a coin may still possess claws sharp enough to pierce skin, and when startled, it will use them without hesitation. The pain is sudden and sharp, followed by swelling and sometimes bleeding. And while the injury may not be life-threatening, it leaves a lasting impression that clashes with the image of harmless seaside fun. Larger reef-associated crabs elevate this risk significantly, as species such as stone crabs, coconut crabs, and reef-dwelling box crabs possess claws capable of exerting extraordinary force. Stone crabs are famous for claws strong enough to break oyster shells effortlessly, a trait that has made them targets for fisheries that harvest claws alone. Coconut crabs, the largest terrestrial arthropods on Earth, can crack coconuts and have been documented damaging bone, their grip strong enough to hold weight while climbing. Even medium-sized reef crabs, when handled poorly, can deliver injuries that require medical attention, particularly when claws clamp onto joints or soft tissue. The anatomy behind this strength reflects a life spent solving mechanical problems rather than fleeing danger. Crabs are encased in a rigid exoskeleton that protects internal organs but limits flexibility, forcing them to rely on external tools for interaction with the world. Their claws become extensions of the body's strength, controlled with fine precision and capable of applying sustained pressure without fatigue. This design is paired with sensory systems tuned to detect vibration and chemical cues rather than detailed vision, meaning that when a crab grips something, it is responding to pressure and resistance rather than recognizing what it has grabbed. This sensory limitation explains why teasing or poking crabs often escalates into injury, because repeated stimulation without resolution keeps the animal in a heightened defensive state. A crab being prodded with a stick or finger does not interpret playfulness, but ongoing threat, and when it finally secures contact, it applies maximum force to neutralize the source. The fact that humans find this reaction surprising highlights the gap between how we interpret behavior and how animals experience it. Beyond immediate injury, crab bites and pinches carry secondary risks that are often overlooked, particularly in marine environments rich in bacteria. Crabs feed on decaying organic matter as well as live prey, and their claws and mouthparts harbor microorganisms adapted to breaking down tissue. When skin is broken, these bacteria can enter wounds, leading to infections that worsen over time if not cleaned properly. While most such infections are treatable, delays in care can result in prolonged swelling, pain, and complications that far outlast the initial encounter. Ecologically, crabs play a central role in shaping coastal and reef environments, acting as both predators and scavengers that regulate populations and recycle nutrients. In tide pools, shore crabs control algae grazing invertebrates, influence species distribution through predation, and clean up organic debris left behind by retreating tides. On reefs, larger crabs contribute to the breakdown of coral rubble, creating sediment that feeds sand-building organisms and influences reef structure over long timescales. Their claws are not just weapons, but tools that drive ecosystem processes, breaking down material in ways that few other animals can replicate. This role explains why crabs are so often encountered in human-accessible areas, because the same environments that attract people, shallow waters, exposed rocks, abundant life, also support dense crab populations performing essential ecological work. Conflict arises when humans enter these spaces without recognizing that they are stepping into functional systems where every organism is adapted to defend itself or its resources efficiently. Crabs do not flee easily, partly because their sideways locomotion and rigid bodies make rapid retreat awkward, but also because their exoskeleton and claws offer reliable defense. When threatened, standing ground and gripping is often more effective than attempting escape, especially in tight spaces like tide pools or reef crevices. This strategy works well against natural predators that learn to avoid painful encounters, and it works equally well against humans who underestimate it. The perception of crabs as cute or comical is reinforced by cultural imagery and childhood experiences that frame them as toys or mascots rather than wild animals. Cartoon depictions exaggerate their sideways walk and eye stalks, stripping away the reality of their feeding behavior and mechanical capabilities. This framing encourages interaction rather than observation, setting up scenarios where injury becomes likely not because the crab is aggressive, but because expectations are misaligned with biology. Respecting crabs does not require fear, but it does require understanding that their claws exist for a reason, and that any interaction placing human flesh within reach of those tools carries inherent risk. Observing crabs in their environment, watching how they feed, defend territory, and interact with one another, reveals an animal perfectly adapted to its niche, efficient, resilient, and unapologetically physical in its approach to survival. In the end, the sideways walk that makes crabs seem endearing is simply a byproduct of an ancient body plan optimized for stability and leverage, not a signal of weakness or humor. The claws that look oversized are not accessories but central to the crab's existence, tools that decide who eats and who does not, in the crowded competitive spaces of the shore and reef. When humans learn this lesson the hard way, through a painful pinch or crushed fingertip, the surprise lies not in the crab's behavior, but in our own failure to recognize what was always there. The tide pool does not distinguish between play and predation, and the crab does not soften its grip for curiosity. It lives by the rules of force, pressure, and persistence, rules written into its anatomy and reinforced every time a shell breaks beneath its claws. To step into that world safely is to acknowledge those rules, keeping hands back, observing rather than handling, and allowing a creature built for crushing to continue its work uninterrupted. A small guardian of the shoreline whose strength is hidden only until it is tested. In the dim, cold corridors of rocky reefs and submerged ledges, where daylight thins into blue shadow and the seafloor fractures into caves and crevices, lobsters wait. They do not roam openly like fish, nor do they drift passively with the current, but instead occupy fixed strongholds carved into stone, places where space is limited, visibility is poor, and retreat routes are few. These are environments shaped by pressure and conflict, and lobsters fit them perfectly. Armored bodies wedged deep into holes, antennae extended like living tripwires, claws held forward not as decoration, but as barricades. To encounter a lobster in the wild is not to meet seafood, but to intrude into a defended bunker, one where the occupant is very much alive, alert, and prepared to fight. The cultural framing of lobsters as luxury food obscures this reality almost completely, because by the time most people see one, it is restrained, chilled, or already dead, its claws banded shut, and its posture reduced to something inert and manageable. This sanitized version erases the animal's true nature, which is that of a nocturnal, territorial crustacean equipped with some of the most mechanically powerful gripping tools in the shallow ocean. Lobsters did not evolve to be eaten. They evolved to survive among predators larger than themselves, in habitats where brute force and structural integrity determine who keeps shelter and who is exposed to the open sea. A lobster's claws are the centerpiece of this survival strategy, and they are not symmetrical or redundant, but specialized for different tasks that together create a formidable defense. One claw, often larger and heavier, functions as a crusher, its broad molar-like surfaces designed to generate immense force capable of cracking snail shells, crab carapaces, and thick bivalve armor. The other claw, narrower and sharper, acts as a cutter or pincer, capable of slicing soft tissue and maintaining grip once contact is made. This division of labor allows lobsters to handle a wide range of prey and threats, applying either sustained pressure or precise cutting, depending on what the situation demands. The strength behind these claws is not exaggerated folklore, but a measurable product of anatomy and leverage. Lobster muscles are packed densely within the arms and carapace, connected to the claw through a system of joints that amplify force as the claw closes. Unlike a snapping bite, which relies on speed, a lobster's grip is slow, deliberate, and relentless, tightening progressively as long as resistance is felt. This means that once a lobster has closed its claw around something, it does not release reflexively, and the longer the struggle continues, the more damage is likely to occur. Shells crack not because of sudden impact, but because pressure is applied until structural limits are exceeded, a principle that translates alarmingly well to human fingers. Divers who hunt lobsters at night understand this risk intimately, because nighttime is when lobsters emerge from their crevices to forage, walking openly across the reef in search of food. The darkness adds complexity to these encounters, As visibility is limited to the narrow cone of a flashlight, shadows distort depth perception, and the reef becomes a maze of blind corners. Reaching into a hole to grab a lobster without full visibility is an act of trust that the hole contains only what is expected. Yet reefs are crowded places, and many animals share similar shelters. A diver's hand entering a crevice may encounter not just a lobster, but a lobster already braced for defense, claws positioned forward, muscles tensed against intrusion. When contact is made, the response is immediate and decisive, as the lobster clamps down on the nearest solid object, often a hand, wrist, or forearm, delivering a grip that can crush skin, bruise bone, or fracture smaller fingers outright. The pain is intense, and often accompanied by panic, particularly in water, where a diver's mobility is reduced and fine motor control is compromised. In such moments, divers may thrash or attempt to pull free, actions that increase injury as the lobster tightens its grip, interpreting resistance as a larger threat requiring greater force. Handling lobsters in traps or cages presents similar dangers, as the animals inside are already stressed, confined, and competing for space, conditions that lower their threshold for defensive behavior. A lobster pulled from a cage without proper restraint may swing its claws freely, striking at anything within reach, and even experienced fishermen have suffered severe injuries when they underestimate the animal's reach or strength. Gloves offer limited protection, as the force of a large lobster's crusher claw can transmit through fabric and padding, compressing tissue beneath and leaving deep bruising or fractures. The risks extend beyond mechanical injury, because lobsters, like many marine scavengers and predators, carry bacteria on their claws and mouthparts adapted to breaking down organic matter. When skin is broken, these microorganisms can enter wounds, leading to infections that worsen over time if not cleaned properly. In cold water environments, where circulation to extremities is reduced, healing can be slow, increasing the likelihood of complications. What begins as a pinched finger can become a lingering injury that interferes with work or diving for weeks. From the lobster's perspective, all of this behavior is not aggression, but defense of territory and survival. Lobsters rely on crevices not just for shelter, but for thermoregulation, protection during molting, and refuge from predators such as octopus, large fish, and sharks. A lobster forced out of its shelter becomes vulnerable immediately, its rigid exoskeleton offering little protection against crushing jaws, and its slow movement making escape unlikely. Defending a crevice, therefore, is not optional, and lobsters are evolutionarily wired to hold ground rather than flee when confronted within their refuge. Molting adds another layer of vulnerability that shapes lobster behavior, because periodically, lobsters must shed their exoskeleton to grow, emerging temporarily soft and defenseless. During this time, they retreat deep into crevices and avoid confrontation entirely, relying on concealment rather than force. Once the new shell hardens, aggression and territorial defense resume as the lobster reclaims its space and resumes normal activity. Divers encountering lobsters during different stages of this cycle may notice varying levels of resistance, yet even a newly molted lobster can deliver painful pinches with its claws, which regain function faster than full armor. Ecologically, lobsters play a significant role in shaping reef and benthic communities, acting as both predators and scavengers that regulate populations of mollusks, sea urchins, and other invertebrates. By preying on grazers, lobsters indirectly influence algal growth and reef health, contributing to the balance between coral, algae, and invertebrate communities. Their feeding habits recycle nutrients locked in hard shells, making them available to other organisms and maintaining the flow of energy through the ecosystem. Removing lobsters, whether through fishing or disturbance, alters these dynamics, sometimes leading to cascading effects that reshape the reef. The popularity of lobster diving and trapping reflects a long history of human reliance on this animal as food. Yet this reliance often obscures the reality that lobsters are not passive resources, but active participants in their ecosystems. The act of reaching into a lobster hole is not harvesting from a garden, but engaging in a contest of leverage and reaction time against an animal that has survived countless similar challenges from natural predators. The fact that humans usually win does not make the encounter safe, only asymmetrical. There is a particular irony in how luxury and danger intersect in the lobster's story. Because the same claws that command high prices on menus are the tools that make live handling risky and unpredictable. Before a lobster reaches a kitchen, it has fought for territory, crushed prey, defended itself against intruders, and survived in a world that rewards force applied patiently and precisely. That history does not vanish when a human approaches it underwater or lifts it from a cage. It is carried forward in muscle memory and reflex. Understanding lobsters in their natural context reframes them from delicacies into armored survivors, creatures whose sideways scuttle and rigid shells conceal an animal perfectly adapted to a harsh, competitive environment. Their behavior toward humans is not malicious, but it is uncompromising, shaped by millions of years of selection that favored those who held fast rather than let go. When a lobster grips, it is following a rule older than any fishery or recipe, the rule that survival belongs to those who do not release their advantage. In the quiet darkness of the reef at night, when a lobster emerges and moves deliberately across stone, antennae tasting the water ahead, it is not a meal on legs, but a guardian of its own small territory, equipped to defend it with crushing force. To intrude carelessly into that space is to mistake familiarity for safety, forgetting that the ocean's residents do not recognize our categories of food and fascination. The dinner that fights back does so not out of defiance, but out of fidelity to the logic that has kept it alive, a logic written in claws that crack shells and, when given the chance, remind human bones that they are not so different after all. Along the fractured edges of Arctic ice, where floes grind and separate with the slow violence of moving continents, walruses gather in dense, rumbling masses that from a distance look almost absurd. Their bodies spill over one another like oversized sacks of flesh, whiskered faces resting on blubbered shoulders, eyes half closed as if sleep has claimed them all at once. Steam rises from their backs in cold air, breath hissing softly, tusks draped across neighbors with the casual intimacy of animals that have learned to tolerate constant contact. To an outsider, the scene reads as lazy and harmless, a congregation of ungainly giants basking in stillness. Yet this impression collapses the moment the ice shifts unexpectedly or a sudden noise cuts through the air. What appears to be a peaceful pile of resting mammals is in fact a tightly coiled system of mass, muscle, and anxiety, capable of transforming in seconds into a stampeding force that destroys anything in its path. Walruses are among the largest pinnipeds on Earth, their bulk supported by thick layers of blubber that insulate them against polar cold and store energy for long periods spent in frigid water. Adult males can weigh as much as a small truck, their bodies dense and heavy, supported on land by forelimbs and hind flippers that are functional but not built for agility. On ice or rocky beaches, walruses move with effort, dragging their weight forward in short, powerful motions, yet this apparent clumsiness is deceptive because the same mass that limits finesse multiplies momentum. Once a walrus begins to move quickly, it cannot stop easily. And when hundreds of individuals react simultaneously, the result is not chaos, but a wave of living weight. Tusks dominate the walrus silhouette, long ivory teeth that curve downward from the upper jaw and can reach lengths comparable to a human arm. These tusks are not ornamental relics, but multi-purpose tools shaped by evolutionary pressures that reward strength and assertiveness. Walruses use tusks to haul their bodies out of the water onto ice or land, anchoring them into the surface and levering their bulk upward with surprising efficiency. They use them in dominance displays, sparring with rivals to establish hierarchy within herds, and in defense against predators such as polar bears. When threatened or startled, those same tusks become weapons capable of goring, crushing, and tearing, driven not by precision, but by mass and proximity. The danger walruses pose to humans rarely comes from targeted aggression, but from panic amplified by numbers, because walrus social structure relies on safety in aggregation rather than flight. Haul-out sites, whether on ice floes or coastal beaches, concentrate animals together as a defense against predators and environmental stress. Yet this concentration creates vulnerability when disturbance occurs. A sudden engine noise, the approach of a boat, low-flying aircraft, or even human voices carried by wind can trigger a reflexive response that ripples through the group. One walrus shifting abruptly presses against another, tusks scrape, bodies tense, and within moments, the entire herd may surge toward the water or away from the perceived threat. When this happens on ice, the consequences can be immediate and severe. Ice floes that supported dozens of resting walruses can fracture under sudden movement, tipping or breaking apart as thousands of pounds shift at once. Animals slide, fall into the water, or climb over one another in frantic attempts to escape, crushing smaller individuals beneath them. Calves are especially vulnerable, trapped between adults with no room to maneuver, and mortality during stampedes can be high even without human presence directly in the path. On land, the danger extends outward because stampeding walruses do not discriminate between obstacles. People standing too close to haul-out sites have been injured or killed when herds surged unexpectedly, their immense bodies rolling forward like boulders loosened from a cliff. A walrus does not need to intend harm to cause it, because a single step from an animal weighing over a ton can crush bone, and a falling walrus can pin a person beneath it with no possibility of escape. Boats face similar risks when they approach walrus herds too closely, particularly in shallow waters where animals rest on ice near shore. Walruses are curious, but intolerant of intrusion, and a boat that drifts into their comfort zone may provoke agitation that escalates rapidly. There are documented cases of walruses ramming small vessels, tipping them with sheer body weight, or puncturing hulls with tusks during defensive displays. In these encounters, the walrus is not hunting or attacking, but attempting to remove a perceived threat from its immediate environment, using the tools evolution provided without regard for the fragility of human craft. Understanding why walruses react this way requires appreciating the sensory world they inhabit, because their perception of threat is shaped by sound and vibration more than sight. Walruses have relatively poor visual acuity on land, but their hearing and sensitivity to low-frequency vibrations are well developed, allowing them to detect predators and shifting ice from a distance. In a quiet polar environment, the sudden intrusion of mechanical noise carries far, echoing through ice and water in ways humans often underestimate. An engine revving, a drone buzzing overhead, or even repeated splashes can sound like an approaching predator or collapsing ice, cues that demand immediate response rather than careful evaluation. Thermoregulation further complicates these reactions because walruses haul out of the water to rest and conserve energy, reducing heat loss after long periods spent foraging on the seafloor. When forced back into the water prematurely by disturbance, they lose this thermal advantage, increasing metabolic demands and stress. Repeated disturbances can therefore erode the energy balance that allows walruses to survive in extreme environments, making them more reactive and less tolerant over time. A herd that has been flushed repeatedly may respond more quickly and violently to any subsequent intrusion, even if the trigger is relatively minor. Tourism has amplified these risks dramatically in recent decades, as shrinking sea ice pushes walruses onto land in larger numbers and human access to polar regions increases. Cruise ships, tour boats, and wildlife expeditions bring people closer to haul-out sites than ever before, often motivated by the desire for dramatic images rather than understanding of animal behavior. Crowds gather, engines idle, cameras click, and drones hover, each element adding to the sensory load experienced by the herd. While individual operators may attempt to maintain distance, the cumulative effect of repeated visits can push walruses beyond their threshold for tolerance. The danger is not limited to humans, because walruses themselves pay the highest price when panic spreads through densely packed groups. Stampedes crush calves and weaker individuals, leaving carcasses piled beneath the living, a grim outcome that contradicts the tranquil image often presented in photographs. These deaths are not natural selection at work in isolation, but consequences of human-driven disturbance layered onto an already stressed system facing habitat loss and climate change. Walruses evolved to manage threats that were sporadic and predictable, such as polar bear attacks or shifting ice, not constant noise and presence from an unfamiliar species that does not behave like any predator in their evolutionary history. Humans approach slowly, linger, return repeatedly, and surround haul-out sites from multiple angles, creating confusion rather than clear threat signals. In this context, the safest option from the walrus perspective is often to flee en masse, regardless of the cost. Tusks play a visible role in these moments, as animals push past one another and toward the water, using their teeth to hook ice, pull bodies forward, or shove rivals aside. When humans are in the path, these tusks can inflict devastating injuries, not because the walrus aims to attack, but because proximity and movement intersect dangerously. A single upward thrust meant to gain leverage can impale, a sideways swing can shatter bone, and once the animal's mass is in motion, there is no room for correction. Ecologically, walruses are key benthic predators, spending much of their lives on the seafloor feeding on clams, worms, and other invertebrates that live buried in sediment. Using sensitive whiskers, they detect prey beneath the surface, then create powerful suction to extract soft bodies from shells, leaving empty valves scattered across the seabed. This feeding behavior aerates sediment and redistributes nutrients, shaping benthic ecosystems in ways that support other species. Disrupting walrus behavior through repeated disturbance affects not only haul-out dynamics, but feeding patterns and energy budgets that ripple outward through Arctic marine systems. The image of the walrus as a lazy, comical creature persists because its resting behavior aligns with human projections of relaxation. Yet this image ignores the reality that rest is a strategic necessity in an environment that demands extreme energy expenditure. When walruses rest, they are not idle, but recovering from hours of diving in near-freezing water, preparing for the next cycle of foraging that keeps them alive. Interrupting that cycle repeatedly carries consequences that accumulate quietly until they erupt violently. For humans, the lesson is stark, because unlike encounters with smaller animals, there is no margin for error around walruses. Distance is not a courtesy but a safety requirement, and silence is not respect but a survival strategy for both species. Approaching haul-out sites closely, lingering for photographs, or assuming that stillness equals tolerance invites disaster, because when a walrus herd moves, it does so with unstoppable force. In the end, the whiskered wrecking ball is not a monster, nor a villain of the polar seas, but an animal perfectly adapted to its world and dangerously mismatched with ours. Its bulk, tusks, and short temper are not flaws, but solutions to a life lived on shifting ice and dark seafloors, where hesitation can mean death. When humans step into that world without understanding its rules, the outcome is not a clash of intentions, but a collision of physics and biology. The walrus does not warn politely, nor does it adjust its reactions to accommodate curiosity. It responds as it always has, with movement, mass, and momentum, reshaping the space around it in seconds. To witness a walrus safely is to keep enough distance that this transformation never begins, allowing the herd to remain what it appears to be at rest, a living mosaic of flesh and ivory on ice, powerful but calm, as long as it is left alone. In warm, shallow lagoons where the water turns milky turquoise over wide seagrass plains, dugongs move with a quiet inevitability that feels almost timeless. Their rounded backs break the surface briefly before slipping beneath again, leaving only faint ripples that spread and fade across the meadow. From a distance, they resemble drifting boulders softened by water, slow and unhurried, their presence soothing rather than imposing. This appearance has earned them the nickname of sea cows, a label that frames them as gentle, benign, and somehow harmless, creatures meant to be admired up close rather than respected from afar. Yet the lagoon they inhabit is not a petting zoo, and the dugong is not a floating ornament, but a massive, muscular marine mammal whose life is governed by weight, momentum, and an ecological authority over seagrass landscapes that few other animals possess. A fully grown dugong can weigh as much as a small car, its barrel-shaped body supported by dense bone structure and thick muscle adapted for life, spent grazing along the seafloor. Unlike dolphins or seals, dugongs are not built for speed or agile maneuvering, but for steady, energy-efficient movement across broad feeding grounds. Their paddle-like tail provides powerful thrust, but their turning radius is wide, and their ability to dodge sudden obstacles is limited, especially in shallow water, where vertical escape options are constrained. This physical reality becomes critical when humans enter the same space. because a dugong cannot simply swerve away from an approaching boat or swimmer at the last second. Once it commits to a direction, its mass carries it forward, and any object crossing that path becomes part of the equation. Boat traffic is the most serious and persistent threat in this context, because shallow lagoons favored by dugongs are also ideal for small vessels, tour boats, and recreational watercraft. Propellers churn through the same depths where dugongs feed, often with limited visibility due to sediment stirred up by waves and engines. A dugong rising to breathe may surface directly beneath a boat that never saw it coming, resulting in blunt force trauma or propeller strikes that leave deep scars or prove fatal. These collisions are not rare anomalies, but a leading cause of injury and death in dugong populations across their range, a grim testament to how incompatible modern traffic patterns are with animals evolved for quiet, predictable environments. Swimmers and snorkelers introduce a different but still significant risk, because while they move more slowly than boats, they often approach dugongs deliberately, closing distance for photographs or prolonged observation. In clear water, a dugong may appear close enough to touch, encouraging people to drift directly into its path or hover above its feeding area. When the dugong changes direction or rises unexpectedly, collisions can occur, knocking swimmers aside with surprising force. The animal does not intend harm, but a body weighing hundreds of kilograms does not need intention to cause injury, especially when contact happens underwater, where balance is fragile and reaction time is limited. The danger of these encounters is compounded by the dugong's sensory world, which is tuned to detect subtle changes in water movement and sound, rather than sudden visual cues. Dugongs rely heavily on hearing and vibration detection to navigate murky environments, and the approach of a quiet swimmer or slowly idling boat may not register clearly until it is too close to avoid. When startled at close range, a dugong may accelerate abruptly, swinging its tail or rolling its body in ways that can strike nearby humans unintentionally. In confined lagoons, these movements can displace large volumes of water, creating turbulence that disorients swimmers and increases the risk of panic. Beyond immediate physical danger, human fascination with dugongs carries a more insidious cost through disturbance of their feeding grounds. Dugongs are specialist herbivores, feeding almost exclusively on seagrass, and they do so with a precision that shapes entire ecosystems. Using their downturned snouts and muscular lips, they uproot seagrass rhizomes and leaves, leaving characteristic feeding trails etched into the sediment like plowed furrows. This grazing is not destructive when performed naturally, because it stimulates new growth, maintains seagrass diversity, and prevents any single species from dominating the meadow. In effect, dugongs act as landscape managers, deciding which seagrass thrives and which retreats through patterns of repeated feeding. This balance is delicate, however, and easily disrupted by excessive human presence. When boats anchor repeatedly in the same areas, chains and anchors tear up seagrass beds, fragmenting the very habitat dugongs depend on. When tour operators chase dugongs to guarantee sightings, animals are forced to abandon feeding sites prematurely, leaving patches overgrazed or underused in ways that alter meadow structure. Repeated disturbance can cause dugongs to avoid otherwise productive areas altogether, concentrating feeding pressure elsewhere and reducing overall seagrass resilience. Feeding dugongs directly, a practice sometimes encouraged by misguided tourism, introduces further problems by altering natural behavior and nutritional balance. Dugongs evolved to consume large volumes of low-energy seagrass, spreading feeding effort across wide areas to meet metabolic needs. Hand feeding concentrates activity unnaturally, teaching dugongs to associate humans with food and encouraging them to linger in high-traffic zones where collision risk is greatest. It also disrupts social dynamics, as dominant individuals monopolize handouts while others are displaced, increasing stress and competition within the group. Stress is a critical factor in dugong survival because these animals operate close to energetic limits despite their calm demeanor. Seagrass is not particularly nutritious, and dugongs must spend many hours each day feeding to meet energy requirements, especially in cooler seasons when thermoregulation demands increase. Thick skin and a layer of blubber provide insulation, but maintaining body temperature still requires consistent intake, and any interruption to feeding has consequences that accumulate over time. A dugong that is repeatedly flushed from feeding areas burns energy without replacing it, weakening its condition and reducing reproductive success. Reproduction itself is slow and vulnerable, as dugongs have long gestation periods and produce a single calf at a time, investing heavily in each offspring. Calves nurse for extended periods and remain close to their mothers, learning feeding routes and safe areas through association. When mothers are stressed by boat traffic or harassment, calves may be separated temporarily, increasing the risk of injury or predation. In extreme cases, stampedes of boats or swimmers can cause mothers to flee abruptly, leaving calves struggling to keep up in turbulent water. The ecological consequences of disrupting dugong behavior extend beyond the animals themselves, because seagrass meadows are foundational habitats that support fish, invertebrates, and coastal stability. Healthy seagrass beds reduce erosion, improve water clarity, and serve as nurseries for countless species. When dugong grazing patterns are altered by human disturbance, these meadows can degrade, leading to cascading effects that impact fisheries and shoreline resilience. In this way, overloving dugongs harms not only the animals, but the broader ecosystems that depend on them. There is a paradox at the heart of dugong tourism, because the same qualities that draw people to them, their calmness, tolerance, and apparent friendliness, are precisely what make them vulnerable. Dugongs do not flee readily, nor do they display obvious aggression or warning signals, and this lack of drama invites close approach rather than caution. Unlike predators that command respect through fear, dugongs rely on space and predictability to survive, needs that are often ignored in crowded lagoons where human excitement overrides ecological understanding. The image of the dugong as a peaceful sea cow is not wrong, but it is incomplete, because peace does not equate to safety, and gentleness does not imply robustness. A dugong owns its seagrass meadow not through forceful defense, but through continuous presence and consumption, a quiet dominance that shapes the environment invisibly. When humans intrude repeatedly, they challenge that ownership not by confrontation, but by erosion, gradually undermining the conditions that allow dugongs to exist at all. Respectful coexistence with dugongs requires restraint rather than intimacy, an acceptance that observation from a distance preserves both safety and ecological function. Slowing boats in known dugong habitats, avoiding shallow feeding areas, and resisting the urge to chase or touch are not restrictions on enjoyment, but prerequisites for ensuring that these animals remain part of the lagoon's future. When dugongs are left undisturbed, they continue their slow circuits across the meadow, cropping seagrass, surfacing to breathe, and sinking back into blue water with the same unhurried grace that has defined them for millions of years. In the end, the dugong story is not one of danger inflicted deliberately, but of danger created through misunderstanding and excess affection. Their weight, limited agility, and dependence on fragile habitats make them incompatible with crowded, high-speed human activity, even when intentions are good. To encounter a dugong safely and ethically is to recognize that gentleness deserves protection, not proximity, and that some of the ocean's most remarkable creatures ask for nothing more than space to continue shaping the world beneath the waves. The gentle grazer that owns the seagrass does not need to fight to assert its role, because its influence is written into every blade it consumes and every trail it leaves behind. Our responsibility is not to insert ourselves into that process, but to step back far enough that it can continue uninterrupted. A quiet reminder that stewardship begins where curiosity ends. In warm coastal waters, where reefs meet harbors and concrete pilings descend into blue depths, massive shapes hover with unsettling stillness, their bulk suspended as if gravity has loosened its grip. Groupers patrol these spaces slowly, thick bodies barely moving, pectoral fins fanning with minimal effort as they watch everything that enters their territory. Their eyes are large, dark and steady, tracking divers, boats and drifting objects with a calm that feels almost inquisitive. At popular dive sites and marinas, these fish become familiar presences, appearing day after day in the same places, growing accustomed to human traffic until they are spoken of as locals rather than predators. Divers give them nicknames, photographers frame them like portraits, and tour guides point them out as gentle giants, the underwater equivalent of friendly dogs waiting for scraps. This perception is dangerously incomplete because a grouper's stillness is not docility but calculation, and its apparent friendliness is often the product of conditioning rather than temperament. Groupers are apex ambush predators, built to dominate reef food webs through explosive power rather than pursuit. Their bodies are deep and muscular, supported by thick bones and massive jaw structures that hide a feeding mechanism both ancient and brutally effective. A grouper does not chase prey across open water. It waits, blending into reef shadows, then strikes in a fraction of a second with a force generated not by teeth alone, but by physics. The defining feature of a grouper's feeding strategy is suction, a vacuum strike that relies on rapid expansion of the mouth and gill cavities to pull prey inward faster than it can react. When a grouper opens its mouth, the volume inside increases suddenly, dropping pressure and causing surrounding water to rush inward, carrying anything nearby along with it. This flow is so powerful that prey fish are often swallowed whole without the grouper needing to clamp down immediately. The jaws close only after the victim is already inside, trapped by inward-pointing teeth designed to prevent escape, rather than tear flesh. In the wild, this allows groupers to consume fish, octopus, crustaceans, and even smaller sharks that wander too close to a waiting mouth. This same mechanism does not distinguish between prey and foreign objects because it evolved to be indiscriminate within a narrow range of size and distance. When divers hold cameras, shiny objects, or handfuls of fish near a grouper's face, they are placing those items directly into the zone where suction feeding operates most effectively. The grouper does not bite experimentally or nibble, it commits fully or not at all. When it commits, everything within reach is pulled inward in a sudden, unstoppable rush of water. There are documented incidents of groupers engulfing cameras, masks, and even diver hands in these moments, not out of aggression, but because the object matched the size, movement, and position of food the fish had been trained to expect. At feeding stations, where groupers are routinely hand-fed to entertain tourists, this risk increases dramatically because repeated exposure conditions the fish to associate human proximity with easy meals. Over time, groupers lose their natural caution and begin to approach divers directly, hovering inches away, mouths slightly open, waiting for the next offering. The danger lies in how fast these interactions can escalate, because a grouper's strike is measured in fractions of a second, faster than human reaction time, especially underwater. A diver reaching out with food may intend to withdraw their hand after releasing it, but once the grouper initiates suction, withdrawal is no longer possible. The force pulling inward can be strong enough to draw fingers, gloves, or camera housings into the mouth, where sharp gill rakers and inward-angled teeth grip automatically. Even if the fish releases quickly, the pressure and abrasion can cause serious injury, including crushed fingers, deep lacerations, or dislocated joints. Larger grouper species magnify this risk simply through scale. Goliath groupers, for example, can grow longer than an adult human and weigh hundreds of kilograms, their mouths large enough to engulf entire stingrays or turtles. When such a fish opens its mouth, the volume of water displaced is enormous, creating suction that can pull objects from surprising distances. A human hand placed casually near the mouth of such a fish is not protected by intention or familiarity. It is simply within range. Marinas and artificial structures create particularly risky environments because groupers often congregate beneath docks and boats where food scraps fall into the water. Fishermen cleaning catch, tourists feeding fish from docks, and discarded bait all contribute to conditioning groupers to patrol these areas aggressively. In murky water, where visibility is reduced, a grouper may strike toward movement or vibration rather than clear visual cues, increasing the chance of accidental contact with swimmers or divers exploring pilings and wrecks. Night diving adds another layer of danger because groupers are often more active hunters after dark, when prey species emerge and human perception is limited by artificial light. A flashlight beam illuminating a fish held in a diver's hand can trigger a strike faster than the diver can register what is happening. In these moments, the grouper is not behaving abnormally, but performing exactly as it evolved to do, exploiting sudden opportunities with decisive force. Beyond immediate injury, hand-feeding groupers has broader ecological consequences that are often overlooked. Groupers play a critical role in regulating reef communities, controlling populations of mid-level predators and herbivores, and maintaining balance between coral, algae, and fish. When groupers become conditioned to human feeding, their natural hunting behavior changes, reducing pressure on prey species in surrounding reefs and concentrating predation unnaturally around feeding sites. This distortion can ripple outward, altering species composition and behavior across the ecosystem. Conditioned groupers may also become more aggressive toward other divers and swimmers, not because they are hostile, but because they have learned to approach humans boldly in search of food. This increases the likelihood of negative encounters, particularly with inexperienced visitors who misinterpret the fish's approach as friendliness rather than expectation. When injuries occur, groupers are often blamed or removed, despite the fact that the behavior was reinforced by human actions. Physiologically, groupers are built to withstand the stresses of ambush feeding, with reinforced skulls, powerful jaw muscles, and shock-absorbing structures that protect the brain during rapid mouth expansion. Their sensory systems are tuned to detect subtle pressure changes and vibrations, allowing them to time strikes with precision, even in complex reef environments. This sensory acuity means that small movements, such as fingers twitching or bubbles escaping equipment, can trigger a response if they resemble prey behavior. The illusion of safety persists because groupers often tolerate close proximity without reacting, hovering calmly as divers approach, sometimes allowing gentle contact without immediate consequence. This tolerance is situational, not inherent, and depends on the fish not perceiving a feeding opportunity. The moment food or food-like movement enters the picture, the dynamic changes completely, and the grouper transitions instantly from observer to predator. There is a psychological component to these encounters that reinforces risky behavior, because humans tend to anthropomorphize animals that show familiarity. A grouper that approaches repeatedly is interpreted as curious or friendly, rather than as a predator exploiting a reliable food source. This misinterpretation encourages closer interaction, hand-feeding, and physical contact, escalating risk over time until an incident occurs. From the grouper's perspective, these interactions are simple cause and effect. Food appears near humans, so humans become part of the feeding environment. The fish does not understand rules, consent, or cautionary guidelines. It responds to stimuli that have consistently led to reward. When a diver's hand replaces a fish in that equation, the grouper applies the same strategy it always has, opening its mouth and letting physics do the rest. The final irony is that groupers do not need to be fed at all to be impressive or engaging. Observed at a distance, hunting naturally, they reveal complex behaviors, including cooperative hunting with other species, sight fidelity spanning decades, and vocalizations produced by vibrating their swim bladders to communicate or intimidate rivals. These behaviors are far more remarkable than any feeding spectacle, yet they are often overshadowed by the desire for close contact. The core message, written repeatedly into these encounters, is simple but uncomfortable, because it places responsibility squarely on human choice rather than animal nature. When you hand-feed a predator, you are not taming it or befriending it. You are testing its instincts with your own body as part of the variable set. Sometimes nothing happens, reinforcing the illusion of control, and sometimes the experiment ends abruptly with injury. Groupers do not mean to harm divers, just as gravity does not mean to break bones when someone falls. They operate according to rules that predate tourism, marinas, and underwater cameras by millions of years. Their mouths open, water rushes in, and whatever is closest goes with it. To forget this is to mistake familiarity for safety and calm for consent. As the final image lingers on a massive grouper hovering beneath a dock, its eye tracking movement above, its mouth opening slightly as water flows through, the lesson is not one of fear, but of restraint. These fish are not pets, mascots, or underwater dogs, but powerful predators shaped by physics and patience. When humans choose to feed them by hand, they volunteer their fingers, cameras, and assumptions as part of an experiment whose outcome is never guaranteed. In the quiet blue beneath the surface, the grouper waits as it always has, not plotting, not judging, simply ready. Whether that readiness turns into danger depends not on the fish, but on how close we decide to place ourselves to a mouth designed to swallow first and ask questions never.